The Last Meridian. The Signal Before the Dark. By Cole Harmon. Copyright 2026 Cole Harmon. All rights reserved. Prologue. Washington, D.C., March 14th, 3:17 a.m. The old man died with his eyes open. That was what the detectives would write in their report later, when they found the body of Edward Hardcastle on the marble floor of the study he had built with his own design specifications 40 years earlier, back when he still believed the future was something you could engineer. His eyes were open, as if he were still trying to understand something. On the desk, 3 darkened monitors, a glass of scotch, untouched, and a single folder of documents, stamped in red, Omega level, eyes only, left open to its final page, as if he had been reading again one more time before whatever happened to him happened. The final page carried a date, March 14th. That day, and a single line of text printed in bold, the field has fallen below the point of no return. Outside the window, Washington slept unaware under a sky that was strangely bright for March. Nobody yet knew that the brightness had nothing to do with the moon. It had to do with something far older and far more final. Hardcastle had known. He had known for 7 years. And he had said nothing. 3 weeks earlier, in a quiet Italian restaurant in Silver Spring, he had finally decided to stop saying nothing. He had not known, handing his daughter a plain folder across a checkered tablecloth, that he would not live to see what came of it. He had hoped, in the private way that dying men hope, that it would not matter, that the world would have time regardless, that his timing would prove irrelevant. It would not prove irrelevant. Very little, in the end, proves irrelevant. In a sensor array 300 kilometers away, in a basement in Reno that a stubborn, sleepless engineer had built with his own savings in his own hands, a number was crossing a threshold it had never crossed before. The engineer was not awake to see it happen. He would see it in 4 hours, when his phone rang for the 3rd time, and a voice he trusted told him to check his email. The field did not care that no one was watching when it crossed. It simply crossed, the way the planet does everything, indifferent to whether anyone was prepared, and entirely without the patience to wait until someone was. Chapter 1. The Engineer of Silence. Ethan Cross had not slept in 54 hours when his phone rang for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. It was not the romantic insomnia of obsessed scientists, the kind you see in films where the misunderstood genius fills blackboards with equations in the dead of night. This was real insomnia, the kind that left a metallic aftertaste in your mouth and made the edges of things look slightly out of focus, as if the world were losing its resolution. Ethan was sitting in front of 3 monitors in the private laboratory that occupied the basement of his house in Reno, a bare house, bought for convenience and never furnished with any love, staring at data that should not have existed. The phone rang again. He looked at it without touching it. The screen read, MAYA. Then 3 seconds later, missed call 3. Maya Reyes never called 3 times in a row. She never called before 7 in the morning. She was the most disciplined person Ethan had ever known, and discipline was one of the few things he still respected unconditionally, alongside mathematics and black coffee. He answered, Cross. His voice had the quality of someone who had not used their vocal cords for many hours. Have you seen the news? Maya's voice was tense, not frightened. Maya Reyes did not get frightened. It was part of her operational code, but tense, like a wire stretched before it snaps. I don't watch the news. I know. Check your email. I sent you something 10 minutes ago. Ethan rolled his chair toward the 3rd monitor, opened the mail client with an automatic gesture. There was a message from Maya.Reyes at NOAA.gov with the subject line, Hardcastle. No text in the body, only a 42-page PDF attachment. Who is Hardcastle? He asked as the file downloaded. Was Hardcastle. A pause. Edward Hardcastle, Emeritus Director of the Department of Applied Geophysics at the Pentagon, found dead last night in his study. Ethan opened the PDF. The first page was a government document with the Department of Defense letterhead and 3 overlapping classification stamps, 2 of which had been blacked out with ink. The one that remained legible read, Omega level. How did you get this? He asked slowly. I'm not telling you over the phone. Another pause, shorter. Are you still in your Reno den? Yes. Good. Don't move. I'll be there in 5 hours. Maya. Ethan. Her voice dropped half a tone, and that was the moment he understood that the situation was different from any situation they had been in before. I've read the document. All of it. 3 times. Silence. Cross. If what's written in there is true, there are no more 5 hours. There are no more 5 years. There are perhaps 30 days. 30 days for what? The answer came without hesitation, with the clinical precision of someone who has already processed something enormous and made peace with it, for everything. Then she hung up. Ethan remained motionless for a long moment, phone still in hand, eyes on the classified document scrolling slowly across the screen. The first pages were dense bureaucracy, authorizations, signatures, dates. The most recent date was 3 weeks earlier. The oldest was from 2017. 7 years. Someone had known for 7 years. He raised his eyes toward the narrow window that opened at street level. Outside it was almost dawn, that gray, uncertain light that precedes the sun by 20 minutes, when the sky does not yet know what color to be. A car passed slowly. A jogger with a dog. The normal world doing the normal things of the normal world. He turned back to his monitors. He opened a folder he had been examining before the call. 18 months of data collected independently, through a network of sensors he had built piece by piece over the last 3 years, funded with his own savings after the university had cut him off from the research program. Data he should not have had. Data that nobody should have had, according to the Department of Defense, which 6 months earlier had delivered a letter signed by a general whose name Ethan had never heard, ordering him to cease collection immediately. He had continued. He looked at the graphs on the first monitor. Then he looked at the first page of the classified document Maya had sent him. The numbers were the same. Exactly, terribly the same. He sat for a long time without moving, the 3 screens casting their pale blue light across his face in the dark basement. Outside, Reno was waking up, the rumble of a garbage truck somewhere, a distant siren, the first hesitant sounds of city remembering how to be itself. In 3 weeks, Ethan thought, or perhaps fewer, the people in those cars and on those sidewalks would know something they did not know now. They would understand something that had been kept from them with great deliberateness and at great cost. He was not yet certain what that would mean for any of them. He was only certain that the numbers were the same, and that Maya Reyes was on the road. He wanted to make coffee. It was going to be a long morning. Ethan Cross was 37 years old, and had the look of someone who had lived 60 years with intensity. His was not the kind of face you noticed immediately. Nothing particularly angular or cinematic about it, but it was a kind of face you remembered afterward, when you thought back. He had a tattoo on his left wrist, a mathematical formula that his sister had said looked like a prayer, and which he had neither confirmed nor denied. He wore glasses only when he was tired, which meant he wore them almost always. He had spent 12 years at NASA as a geomagnetic engineer, a title that most people did not know the meaning of, and which Ethan had stopped explaining at work dinners around the age of 33, when he had understood that it did not matter. It mattered to his colleagues. It mattered to the data. That was enough. Then the thing with the SHIELD project had happened, and he no longer worked for NASA. What he did now, officially, was private consulting for mining and petroleum companies interested in geomagnetic anomalies, work that paid well, bored him almost completely, and left him enough time and resources to continue what his former colleagues called, with affectionate condescension, his obsession. The obsession had a technical name, geomagnetic inversion, or, in the shorthand Ethan had begun using in his private notes, with an almost poetic precision, the silence of the field. The Earth's magnetic field, the invisible shield that envelopes the planet and protects it from the solar wind, that orients compasses and guides migratory birds, and makes life as we know it possible, is not static. It has never been static. In the geological history of the Earth, the field has reversed hundreds of times. The North Pole became south, the south became north, and in the middle of this transition, the field weakened, fragmented, became irregular and unpredictable, like a switch being reset. The last reversal had occurred approximately 780,000 years ago. The historical average was 1 every 200,000 to 300,000 years. We were almost 500,000 years overdue, and the field in the last 150 years had lost 9% of its intensity. In the last decade, the loss had accelerated. Ethan's data, the data nobody should have had, showed a further acceleration over the last 2 years, an acceleration that had no precedent in recorded history. The Hardcastle document showed the same thing, with one difference. The document had a projection, and the projection had a date. He was still staring at that date when, 4 hours and 11 minutes later, he heard tires on the gravel outside and went up to open the door before Maya could knock. She looked like someone who had not slept. He could tell from small signals. Makeup not refreshed, jacket slightly rumpled at the shoulders, and energy in her movement that was fatigue transformed into adrenaline. Maya Reyes worked this way under pressure. She became more precise, not less, like a watch that runs faster when a mechanism is under tension. "Did you make coffee?" she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I made coffee." Ethan closed the door. "Did you take the 80? "The 89. Fewer cameras." He raised an eyebrow. "You're becoming paranoid." "I'm becoming precise." Maya set her bag on the kitchen table, unzipped it, and pulled out a laptop and a rigid plastic folder. Then she turned to look at him with those dark eyes that Ethan had learned, in 4 years of irregular collaboration, to read like a precision instrument. Hardcastle didn't die of a heart attack. How do you know? Because heart attack is what the official statement from the D.C. prosecutor's office says, issued this morning at 7. And because when the government issues an official statement within 4 hours of finding the body of a former Omega-classified Pentagon director, without opening a formal investigation, something doesn't add up. Ethan poured the coffee. He passed it to Maya without asking how she took it. After years he knew. Black hot, without ceremony. "Where does the document come from?" he asked. Maya held the cup with both hands. A brief pause, that of someone calculating how much to say. Hardcastle had a daughter, Sonia, 32, oceanographer, works for NOAA on contract. My same agency, though we've never met. A sip of coffee. 3 days ago, Sonia sent me a coded message through a channel we use to communicate sensitive data between agencies. She told me her father had handed her something, physically, in a meeting in Washington 2 weeks ago. A folder. He had told her that if anything happened to him, she should get it to someone who could understand the data. And she chose you. Hardcastle knew me. We had collaborated 3 years ago on an ocean current monitoring project. He was honest, in the way that people are honest when they have kept secrets for too long and can no longer bear it. Maya opened the plastic folder. The folder contained a physical copy of the document I sent you, plus these. On the table fell a series of photographs printed on plain paper. Ethan looked at them. They were satellite images, the unmistakable visual signature of geomagnetic mapping, with colored contour lines superimposed, showing field intensity in different regions of the globe. The red zone, the field minimum, was centered on the South Atlantic, but it was spreading in a way that Ethan recognized immediately, because it was exactly what his sensors had been showing on a smaller scale for 18 months. "When were these taken?" he said, indicating the series of images in chronological order. "The last one 3 weeks ago. Do you see the difference between this one?" She pointed to the first in the series, "and this last one." The difference was visible even to the naked eye. The red zone had grown. It had expanded northward and eastward at a speed that, in geological terms, was equivalent to an explosion. "How fast?" asked Ethan, even though he had already done the calculation. According to Hardcastle's projections, if the degradation rate remains constant, the field will reach the critical fragmentation point in 28 to 32 days. And if it accelerates? Maya looked at him. Less. Ethan sat down. He remained silent for a long moment, staring at the photographs. Outside, a truck passed on the street. The refrigerator hummed. The world made its normal sounds. What happens when the field fragments? Asked Maya. Not because she did not know. She knew. She was asking because sometimes you had to say it aloud to make it real. Ethan answered quietly, as if reading from a page he had memorized many years ago and had never wanted to use. The solar wind reaches the surface. First gradually, then massively. Electronic systems are destroyed. Satellites, power grids, communications. Radiation increases to levels incompatible with human life at exposed latitudes. Ocean currents change. The climate destabilizes in unpredictable ways. A pause. It's not an immediate end. It's not an explosion. It's more like removing the air from a room very slowly, then all at once. And the government knows. The government has known for 7 years. Maya set down her cup. Then the question, she said, is not what is happening. It's what they're doing about it. Ethan raised his eyes. And why they are not telling us. They worked for 4 hours without stopping, building a map. Literally, a map pinned to the laboratory wall with tacks and red string like an old spy film, of what they knew, what they could deduce, and what was still missing. What they knew, the geomagnetic field, was an accelerated collapse. The American government, through a classified program directed by Hardcastle, had been monitoring the phenomenon for at least 2017. The most conservative projection gave 30 days to the critical fragmentation point. What they could deduce, Hardcastle's death was not natural. Someone did not want the information to get out. Someone with access to the mechanisms of classification and the security structures of the Pentagon. What was missing, everything else, who they were, what they were planning, whether a solution existed, or something that passed itself off as one. There's a code name in the document, said Maya at a certain point, without raising her eyes from the laptop. Page 23. A code name, Arcadia. Ethan found the page. Arcadia appeared in a heavily redacted paragraph. 3/4 of the text blacked out, but from the legible portion, it was clear that it referred to a program, a response program, with a budget that had 6 zeros after the first digit. An evacuation plan, said Ethan, or something worse. Maya stood up, went to the map. She pointed to Nevada. The document mentions Nevada 3 times, twice in relation to Arcadia. She pointed to a blank space in the desert northeast of Reno. Here, this area here. There's nothing there officially, but she opened a window on the laptop. Commercial satellite images, the kind available on public services. She zoomed in on an area of the desert. At first glance, nothing, flat desert, burned, identical to hundreds of square kilometers of the same desert. But Ethan was an engineer. He knew how to look for anomalies. Those are roads, he said slowly. Beneath the surface, the thermal reflectivity is different. The ground has been disturbed. Underground construction, confirmed Maya, started, according to the oldest images I was able to find, in 2018. 1 year after the government had discovered what was happening to the field. Ethan and Maya looked at each other. They're not trying to stop anything, said Ethan. The certainty arrived cold, complete, like a mathematical result. They're building an ark. Chapter 2. 30,000 feet. General Marcus Webb did not read dossiers on airplanes. It was a rule he had given himself 30 years earlier, when he had understood that 30,000 feet was the best place to think without the pressure of dossiers. Up there was nothing that could be done, except wait to land. And Webb had learned, at considerable cost, that decisions made under pressure were decisions you paid for later. He sat alone in the Department of Defense private jet, 16 seats, all empty except his, with an untouched glass of mineral water on the small table and his eyes on the clouds passing below him like a lunar landscape. He was flying from Washington toward Las Vegas, from where he would take a helicopter. Destination not recorded in the official flight logs. Destination, Arcadia. Marcus Webb was 60 years old with the body of a man of 50 who trained like a man of 30. It was not cruelty. It was discipline, the same discipline with which he had built everything in his life. The military career, the marriage that had lasted 22 years before Christine left without making a scene, the position he now occupied in the organogram of the American government, so high and so deep in shadow that most of his former superiors did not even know he existed. On the secure phone, the model used only by members of the committee, a message arrived. Hardcastle contained. Acquisition second copy in progress. Reyes/cross problem. Confirmed. Webb remained motionless, looking at the screen for a few seconds. Then he typed, "Timeline?" The response came in less than a minute. 72 hours. Maximum. Webb set down the phone. He looked at the clouds again. Over the course of his career, he had made decisions that cost lives. He had signed orders, given authorizations, looked in the face of what that meant, and continued walking because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was not a category he knew. But what he was about to do was different. Not different in order of magnitude, different in kind. Because the things he had done before, the black operations, the classifications, the silences, all had a justification he could articulate, even if only to himself. Protect the country, maintain stability, buy time. What he was about to do had a different justification, the same in a certain sense, but amplified until it became unrecognizable. Protect the country, except that the country, in this case, was a list of names, 4,000 names, the most selected, the most necessary, the most, he hated the word, found it romantic in the wrong way, but there was no other, the most worthy, 4,000 out of 330 million. The jet began its descent toward Las Vegas. Webb picked up the phone again. Reyes/cross procedure. Authorized. Maintain distance. No contamination. He turned off the screen. Outside, through the oval window, the Nevada desert stretched in every direction like a promise or threat. It was difficult to distinguish between the two. From up here, Marcus Webb was not a simple man, and he was not a cruel one, and he was not an idealist, and he was not a coward. He was something more difficult to define and more dangerous than any of those things. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life making choices that other people could not make, and who had slowly, over decades, convinced himself that this capacity, to choose, to act, to bear the weight of the unchosen, was not merely a professional qualification but a moral one, that the ability to do what needed to be done, without flinching, was itself a form of virtue. He had not always believed this. At 30, he had been more uncertain, more capable of doubt. The doubt had been trained out of him the way you train anything out of a person, through repetition and reward, through the slow replacement of one habit of mind with another. He thought, sometimes, about the version of himself that had existed before the training. He thought about it the way you think about a country you lived in as a child and cannot return to, with a recognition that is not quite nostalgia, because nostalgia implies you wish you were still there, and he was not sure that he did. The desert below was orange in the late afternoon light, scored by dry riverbeds and the straight geometries of old roads that went nowhere anyone needed to go anymore. In an hour, he would be underground. In an hour, he would be in a room with a map of the field hung on the wall, and the numbers updated every 6 minutes. And the question was never what was happening, but only how to manage it. He had been managing it for 7 years. He was very tired. He allowed himself to notice this, the tiredness, for the length of the descent, with the same careful rationing with which he allowed himself most things. Then the wheels touched the runway, and he became the general again, and the tiredness went into the same place where everything else he could not use went, and he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up and straightened his jacket and was ready. What Webb did not know, or more precisely, what his analysts had assessed as a probability below 4% and therefore not worth noting, was that Ethan Cross had installed, 12 months earlier, an automated alert system connected to the FAA flight databases through an access that he technically should not have had. The system was simple. It monitored the routes of non-commercial private flights departing from Washington toward destinations in southern Nevada and sent a notification every time an unregistered flight appeared in the restricted airspace northeast of Las Vegas. At 2:47 p.m. Nevada time, the system sent a notification. Ethan saw it at 2:52 p.m. while he and Maya were still working on the map on the wall. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "We need to move faster." Maya looked up from the laptop. "What did you see?" "Private flight. Washington to southern Nevada, unregistered route. Landed 14 minutes ago at a strip that does appear in any commercial database." He was already opening a second window, cross-referencing the flight path with the thermal imaging coordinates they had identified that morning. The numbers aligned with a precision that made his stomach tighten. "They're going to Arcadia." "Do you know who?" "Not yet. But whoever it is, they didn't file a flight plan, which means they didn't want the flight logged, which means they have the authority to suppress that kind of thing, which means we're further up the chain than we thought," said Maya. "Yes." She closed the laptop and stood up. There was something in the way she moved, a compression, an efficiency that Ethan had noticed in her before in moments when the situation shifted and recalibration was required. She did not waste motion on reaction. She went directly to action. "Then we go tonight," she said, "before whoever just landed gets briefed on us and decides to do something about it." It was not a question. Ethan looked at her for a moment, at the certainty in her posture, the controlled urgency in her expression, and thought, not for the first time, that of all the people he might have ended up in this situation with, she was the right one. Not because she was not afraid. He was fairly certain she was afraid, the same way he was afraid, the rational functional fear of people who understand what they are looking at. But because her fear did not change the direction she moved in. "Tonight," he agreed. He began calculating what they would need. Chapter 3. The Rules of the Desert. The desert had its rules, and the first was that it did not forgive those who ignored them. Maya knew this from direct experience. She had spent 18 months on a research platform in the waters off Baja California, where the line between control and chaos was as thin as the wind that changed direction without warning. The Nevada desert was not so different. It had the same quality of absolute space, the same feeling that the normal world, the city, people, the ordinary rules of civil life, had been suspended somewhere far away and unreachable. They left Reno at 4 p.m. in Ethan's truck, a Toyota pickup with 80,000 miles on the odometer and a modification to the navigation system that Maya noticed but did not comment on, heading northeast as the sun began its descent toward the desert horizon. The conversation, in the first 20 minutes, was technical. Data, projections, numbers. It was their natural way of being together, through the precision of measurable things, and it had a comfort that neither of them would have been able to define as affection, but that worked in the same direction. Then the road became emptier, the landscape drier, and the silence began to fill with something different. "Do you have a family?" asked Maya at a certain point, looking out the window. "A sister in Portland." A pause. "You?" "My mother in Ciudad de Mexico." More silence. "I haven't spoken to her in 3 weeks. We were arguing about something stupid." Ethan did not answer. There was nothing appropriate to say, and he knew it. "If it's true," said Maya after a moment, and she did not need to specify if what the data says is really true. "It's true. Then 3 weeks becomes important." "Yes. Will you call your sister?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "First, I want to understand what's out there." "A moment. Then we'll see." Maya nodded, even though he could not see her. Outside, the desert stretched in every direction, and the sky above them was turning orange so intense it looked artificial. Neither of them said it was beautiful. It was They parked 3 kilometers from the perimeter, behind an outcropping of basaltic rock that hid them from the road and from anyone who might be looking from below up the slope. The desert at night was a different world. Not silent. This was the wrong idea that people who did not know it had. The desert at night was full of sounds. The wind between the rocks, the insects, something larger moving in the low scrub 200 meters to the north. But they were sounds that belonged there, and they made the human silence, the absence of traffic, of voices, of everything that human beings produce simply by existing, even more total. Ethan had a thermal imaging binocular. This, too, Maya did not ask where he had gotten it. They moved on foot toward the east, keeping low, using the terrain. Maya had done field tracking during her NOAA training, operations in hostile environments, one of the courses the government required for staff working in remote areas, and she moved efficiently, without unnecessary noise. Ethan was stiffer, but not slower. After 40 minutes, they reached a low ridge that looked down on a natural depression in the terrain. They lay flat on the ground. Ethan raised a binocular to his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Well," whispered Maya. "Big." His voice was flat, the neutrality he used when he was processing something enormous and had not yet decided how to process it. "Very big." He passed to the binocular. Maya looked in the depression below them, invisible from the roads, covered by a camouflage net that imitated the thermal signature of the surrounding terrain, but which, at this distance and with this instrument, was clearly artificial. There was a structure. It was not a bunker in the traditional sense, not a military thing, angular and gray. It was something different. The structures visible on the surface were minimal, entrances, ventilation openings, what appeared to be light wells. But the thermal signature of the surrounding ground showed, unequivocally, that below there was an enormous space. Heated, powered, alive. "They're already living down there," she said, lowering the binocular, or preparing to. Ethan was writing something on his phone, recording. The energy consumption numbers I can read from the thermal signature suggest at least a year of full capacity operation, maybe more. "For 1,000 people," said Maya, remembering the figure in the document. "Something like that." They remained in silence a moment. Maya counted the visible openings, 12, 13, and tried to build herself an image of what might be below. Levels, corridors, living spaces, a life support system, food, water, air. For how long? How many years could it hold out? She asked. Depends on what happens on the surface. If the field fragments in the way the data shows, surface radiation will be lethal for, he paused, as if running a calculation, between 5 and 20 years. Depends on latitude, altitude, 100 variables. Down there, protected, they could stay much longer. And then the field reorganizes. Or it doesn't reorganize. Or it reorganizes differently. A long pause. Geological history shows that reversals last between 1,000 and 10,000 years. Maya closed her eyes for a second. 10,000 years. That's the historical maximum. The average is lower. Ethan, 10,000 years. I know. Silence. The wind passed over the ridge with a low, almost musical sound. We have to tell the world what's happening, said Maya. I know. It's not a question of whether. It's a question of how and when. People have the right. I know, Maya. His voice was not hard. It was tired. The problem is that we are 2 people with data that the government has classified Omega in a desert 3 kilometers from a structure that should not exist. And they're already trying to figure out where we are. Who is looking? Someone. The flight message was a confirmation. They know we have a document. They probably know we're in Nevada. How? Hardcastle was monitored. Probably Sonia, too. The coded message she sent you, even if it was coded, the fact that it existed, hell. Maya shifted slightly, instinctively, then lay back down. How much time do we have? Maybe already gone. Maybe a few more hours. Ethan put the binocular back in the bag. We need to move. And we need to figure out one thing. What? He looked at her. How do you say something so large to the world that the world cannot help but hear it? They moved back to the truck in silence, crossing the desert in the same direction, but as if the distance between them had changed in the dark. Not increased, not decreased, only different. The way it is when an important conversation shifts something in the space between two people, without either of them having yet found the words to describe what. Ethan drove west for 40 minutes before stopping at a deserted rest area on Route 95. He had avoided the main roads, chosen secondary routes, changed direction twice without explaining why. Maya had not asked. "We need to use the time we have," he said, turning off the engine, "not to save ourselves, to do something worth doing. Inform the world." "Yes, but simply releasing the data online is not enough. They'll dismantle it. We need a strategy." Maya pulled out the laptop. The battery was at 64%. Rural Nevada hotspots were what they were, but she had a satellite modem for emergencies, an old habit from field work. "I have contacts in 3 countries, she said. Science journalists of standing. The Guardian, Le Monde, Die Zeit. If we send them a complete documentary package simultaneously, with Hardcastle's data and yours, in a way that no single government can suppress it. They suppress it anyway. They have a 48-hour head start before anyone verifies, and in 48 hours, then we give them something they cannot suppress." Maya looked at him. Something visual. Something anyone can see with their own eyes without needing to understand geophysics. Ethan understood. "The auroras," he said. "The auroras. The field is fragmenting. In the next few days, depending on the acceleration, but in the average projection, there will be northern lights visible at much lower latitudes than usual. Much lower. Southern Europe, North Africa, Texas. It's already happening. There have been events in the last month. But people don't know why. An aurora over Rome is beautiful. An aurora over Rome with an explanation, with the data, with the signature of a former NASA engineer and no researcher, with the classified documents of a dead general." "It's a story," said Ethan. "It's the story." Maya opened the laptop. "How long does it take to build it properly?" "I don't know. Not long." He took out his hard drive, the one with the sensor data. "But while we build it, they're looking for us." "I know. And if they find us before the package is out, I know that too." They looked at each other. In that moment, at that dark rest stop on Route 95, with the desert all around them and the sky above beginning, just barely, almost imperceptibly, to show something at the northern horizon that should not have been there, Maya Reyes and Ethan Cross made a decision without speaking. The way certain decisions are made. Not with words, but with the direction in which you sit, with the way you open a laptop, with the fact of not leaving. "Let's start," said Maya. And they started. Above them, the first faint ribbons of light were beginning to move across the sky. Pale green at the edges, almost tentative, like something testing how far it could reach before anyone noticed. Neither of them saw it. They were looking at screens, at data, at the architecture, how you tell the truth to a world that has been carefully kept from hearing it. But it was there, and it was only the beginning. Chapter 4. Sonia Hardcastle had her father's handwriting and her mother's temper and a doctorate in physical oceanography from scripts that she had worked for with the focused determination of someone who understood from an early age that the things worth having required effort that other people found unreasonable. She was 32 years old, and she lived alone in a rented apartment in Silver Spring, and she loved her work with the uncomplicated totality of someone who had chosen it correctly, without compromise on the first try. She studied thermohaline circulation, the deep ocean current system that moved heat and salt around the planet in a cycle that took 1,000 years to complete, and that was, as she had explained to every person who had ever asked her what she did for a living, more important to the climate of the Earth than anything happening in the atmosphere. Her father had called it the planet's heartbeat. He had said this when she was 9 years old. standing with her at the edge of the Pacific on a family vacation, that she remembered with the specific clarity of experiences that shape you before you know you are being shaped. The planet's heartbeat. She had decided at 9 years old that she wanted to spend her life listening to it. She had not known, when she made that decision, that her father was already beginning the work that would eventually consume him. He had been a geophysicist her whole life, a fact of existence like the color of his eyes or the particular way he laughed, which was infrequently and with his whole face, but she had not known what he was working on. He had been careful about that, careful in the way of parents who want to protect their children from things that cannot be unfelt once they are felt. She understood this now. She had not understood it when he told her. He came to Washington on a Tuesday in late February, which was unusual. He lived in Boston and rarely traveled anymore, and when he did, he gave notice weeks in advance because he was methodical about logistics in the way of people who have spent careers in field work and know that preparation is not optional. This time he had called 2 days before and said he would like to have dinner, just the two of them, at the Italian place near her apartment that they both liked. She said yes. She assumed it was something ordinary, a birthday coming up, a health matter he wanted to discuss in person, the kind of conversation that fathers and daughters have when time has become a more visible quantity. It was not ordinary. He arrived looking smaller than she remembered, which was its own information, because her father had always carried himself with the posture of a man who had spent decades in the field and whose body remembered it. He hugged her at the door of the restaurant with more force than usual and held on a second longer than usual, which she noticed and filed away without understanding it yet. They ate. They talked about her work. She was in the middle of an analysis of anomalies in the South Atlantic circulation that had been puzzling her for 3 months, and he listened with the focused attention he had always given her professional life. The attention that she had understood as an adult was one of the most significant gifts he had given her. He asked good questions. He always asked good questions. Then, over coffee, he put a folder on the table. It was a plain manila folder, the kind used for physical documents, thick with paper. Her name was written on the front in his handwriting. "I need you to keep this," he said. "Somewhere safe. Not at your office." She looked at the folder, then at him. "Dad, what is this?" "Something that needs to be in the right hands, if it needs to be anywhere." He looked at his coffee. "I hope it doesn't need to be anywhere. But if it does, I want you to get it to someone who can understand the science. Not a journalist. A scientist. You're frightening me." "I know. I'm sorry." He looked up. "There's a woman at NOAA. Maya Reyes. Do you know her?" "I know of her. We've never met. She works on ocean currents. She's good. She's honest. She worked with me 3 years ago on a project I can't tell you about, and I saw how she operated under pressure." A pause. "If something happens to me, and if you feel that what's in this folder needs to go somewhere, she's the right person." Sonia wanted to ask what he meant by something happens to me. She wanted to ask what was in the folder. She wanted to ask why he was being opaque in a way that was entirely unlike him, because her father was a man of precision who found indirection wasteful and said so often. She asked none of these things. She took the folder. "Promise me you'll read it," he said. "Not tonight. When you're ready." "But read it." "I promise." He nodded. He seemed, she thought, lighter for it. The way people seem lighter when they have put something down that they've been carrying. She noticed this, and it frightened her more than anything else that had happened that evening. They walked out together into the February night, and he hugged her again at the corner, and she watched him walk toward the metro and thought that she should have said more, should have asked more, should have held on a little longer. 3 weeks later, her phone rang at 6 in the morning, and it was a number she did not recognize, and the voice on the other end said he was a physician at Mass General, and she sat down on the floor of her kitchen because her leg stopped working, and she did not remember clearly what was said after that, only the word cardiac, and the word peaceful, and the word quickly, which she was supposed to find comforting, and did not. She read the folder that night. She read it sitting on her living room floor with her back against the couch and a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink, and she read it the way her father had always told her to read data, from beginning without skipping, without forming conclusions before the evidence was complete. It took 3 hours. When she finished, she sat for a long time without moving. The apartment was quiet. Outside, Silver Spring was doing what it did at midnight. A distant car, a dog somewhere, the ordinary sounds of a city that did not know what she now knew. She thought about the South Atlantic anomaly, the thing that had been puzzling her for 3 months in her own data. The irregularities in the thermohaline circulation that did not fit any of the models she had been applying. She had assumed instrumental error. She had recalibrated twice. It was not instrumental error. The circulation anomalies were related to the field degradation. The field affected the ionosphere. The ionosphere affected the atmospheric circulation. The atmospheric circulation affected the ocean. It was all connected, as it was always connected, as the planet had always been a system of systems in which every large change propagated through every other system in ways that took time to see and longer to understand. She had been looking at one thread of it for 3 months and had not known what she was looking at. Her father had known for 9 years. She did not feel angry. She had expected to feel angry, and perhaps she would later. But what she felt that night on her living room floor was something closer to grief and something closer to comprehension. Her father had been carrying this. He had sat across from her at dinners and on holiday visits and at the Italian restaurant 3 weeks ago, and he had known all of it. And he had said nothing because he had made a calculation that protecting her from a knowledge was more important than giving it to her. She did not agree with the calculation, but she understood it in the way that you understand a decision made from love that you still think was wrong. She sent the message to Maya Reyes 11 days later, through a secure channel she had access to through her NOAA credentials. She had drafted and deleted the message 4 times before sending it. The version she sent was 6 sentences long. It gave nothing specific. It asked only whether Reyes would be willing to receive something from a colleague whose father had recently died and who believed the material he had left her was relevant to Reyes's field of expertise. Maya had responded within the hour. Yes. 1 word. Sonia had read it 3 times and then done what she had decided to do before she sent the message. She scanned the folder, encrypted the file, and sent it to the channel with a note that said only, "He trusted you. I am trusting that he was right." Then she sat with her coffee and her ocean current data and her 3-month-old anomaly that she now understood completely, and she thought about her father, and about the folder, and about the fact that the chain of events she had set in motion was now beyond her ability to call back. She found that she did not want to call it back. He had put it in her hands because he trusted her to know what to do with it. She had done what he trusted her to do. Whatever came next was what came next. She opened her data file and returned to the South Atlantic anomaly and began writing the analysis that would, eventually, when everything else had settled, become the paper that established the definitive connection between geomagnetic field degradation and thermohaline circulation disruption. It would be the most important paper she ever published. She wrote it the same way she wrote everything. Carefully, completely, without skipping to conclusion before the evidence was ready. Her father had taught her that. Chapter 5. The Committee. 7 meters below the Nevada desert. The committee met every Tuesday and every Thursday in the conference room that nobody officially called the end of the world room, but that everyone in the corridors called exactly that. There were 6 of them around the oval walnut table, an expensive wood, brought there with a logistics operation whose cost Webb had found vaguely obscene when he first heard the figure, but which he had approved because certain symbols were necessary. The walnut was necessary. It communicated permanence. It communicated that what was decided in that room lasted. Webb sat at the head of the table. To his left, Dr. Linda Chun, geophysicist, 51 years old, the only person in the room whose scientific background was comparable to Cross's, and who had been the first, 7 years ago, to confirm what the data was showing. To his right, Senator Arthur Mills, the committee's political liaison, a man whose hair had gone white in what Webb suspected was a single bad week sometime in 2020, when the projections had first come in at their current range. Across from Webb, 3 more, Price, the analyst, 29 and frighteningly capable Admiral Torres, representing the Joint Chiefs, and a woman named Hartley who nominally worked for the State Department and actually worked for something that did not have a name on any organizational chart Webb had ever seen. Webb did not waste time with preamble. Have Reyes and Cross been located? Last confirmed location. Departing Reno, heading northeast around 4 p.m. Price spoke with the flat efficiency of someone who had been awake for 30 hours and had stopped noticing. Phone signal lost at 5:12. They either removed their phones or left them behind. They're in the desert, said Dr. Chun. Cross knows the terrain. He spent 2 years doing field surveys for mining companies out here. He knows where the cameras are and where they aren't. How close did they get? Asked Webb. We don't know, but if they're in the area, and if Cross has thermal imaging equipment of sufficient quality. They've seen us, said Webb. A statement, not a question. Silence around the table. Webb looked at each of them in turn. He had chosen these people with the same deliberateness with which he had made every consequential decision in his career. Slowly, with full awareness of what he was choosing and what he was not. Chun for her mind, Mills for his connections, Price for his speed, Torres for the institutional weight he carried, Hartley for reasons he did not discuss openly, even here. They were not friends. People in rooms like this one were not friends. They were something more load-bearing than friends. They were the people who knew, and knowing created a bond that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with shared weight. The question, said Webb, is not finding Reyes and Cross. The question is what they do with what they have. They have the data, said Mills. They have Hardcastle's copy. If they make it public. Making a copy of an Omega classified document public without institutional backing is essentially useless, said Price. It gets dismissed within 6 hours. Disinformation, conspiracy theory, foreign destabilization operation. We have the playbook ready. It's been ready for 4 years. Unless they have their own data, said Dr. Chen. Silence. Cross has it. Webb's voice was level. His private sensor network. 18 months of collection. It's why his name was in Hardcastle's file. Hardcastle knew him. Hardcastle knew what he was collecting and respected it enough to keep track of it. If Cross's data aligns with ours. It's not a hypothesis, said Dr. Chun. If Cross built a sensor network with that geographic coverage and has 18 months of data, it aligns. Mathematically impossible that it doesn't. Webb stood. He walked to the back wall of the room, where a screen showed in real time, updated every 6 minutes from the program's satellites, the map of the geomagnetic field. The red zone was there, visible, indisputable, larger than it had been 6 months ago, larger than it had been 6 weeks ago. How many days? He asked, to the map more than to the room. 28 to the critical point in the median projection, said Dr. Chun. 23 in the accelerated projection. A pause. 34 in the optimistic one. We don't use the optimistic one. Webb nodded slowly. So we have 23 days, in the worst case, to manage the Reyes and Cross situation before the window closes regardless. Manage, repeated Mills, with a tone that made clear what he thought of the word. Contain. Neutralize the impact. I'm not saying, Webb turned, I'm not saying anything else. The senator looked at him steadily. Marcus. Hardcastle. Hardcastle made a choice. He chose to pass classified information to his daughter. He violated every protocol, every oath, every. Hardcastle was a man who could no longer sleep, said Mills with a flat voice. You knew that too. Silence. Yes, said Webb after a moment. I knew. He turned back toward the screen. The red zone pulsed in its 6-minute update cycle. 23 days. Or 28. Or 34. Not enough, regardless. Not for 330 million people. Enough for 4,000. Do what needs to be done, he said, without specifying what. He did not need to specify. That was why he had chosen this room, these people, so that he would not need to specify. He sat back down. Price opened his laptop. Torres poured water. Mills looked at his hands. Hartley, who had said nothing during the entire meeting and who never said much, was already typing something on a device that the others in the room could not see the screen of. The map on the wall updated. The red zone shifted imperceptibly eastward, 6 minutes closer. After the others had filed out, Dr. Chin remained. She stayed in her chair as the room emptied, her coffee cup in both hands, until it was only her and Webb and the map on the wall. "You know what bothers me?" she said. "Tell me." "Cross's sensors." She set down the cup. "He built that network with his own money, over 3 years after we cut him off, after we sent him the letter, after we made it very clear that his line of research was unwelcome." She looked at Webb, and he continued anyway. "Not because he's reckless. Cross is not reckless. Because he genuinely believed someone needed to be watching, whether or not they were welcome to." Webb said nothing. "That's what we used to be," said Chun, "before this room, before Arcadia, before the list of 4,000 names. We used to be people who watched because someone needed to be watching. We still are. We're people who watch and then decide who gets to know what we saw. That's different." Webb looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." Chun stood, picked up her files, and walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped. "Marcus, if Cross and Reyes get that package out before we find them, then the world knows." "Yes, and then what?" He looked at the map. "Then we find out whether I've been right about people all these years," he said, "or whether Hardcastle was." Chun left. The door closed behind her with a sound like something final. Webb remained alone in the room with the map and the 6-minute updates and the red zone that was always slightly larger than it had been before. Chapter 6. 7 years. The first time Marcus Webb saw the data, he was standing in a conference room on the 4th floor of the Pentagon with a cup of coffee. He had forgotten a drink, and Dr. Edward Hardcastle was explaining, in the careful measured language of a man who had rehearsed this moment many times, what the numbers on the screen meant. It was October 2017. Outside the window, the Potomac was gray and flat under an overcast sky. Inside the room there were 7 people, and by the time Hardcastle finished speaking, every one of them was looking at the screen in a particular way that people look at things they wish they had not seen. Webb asked 3 questions. He always asked 3 questions when he was processing something large. 1 to confirm he had understood correctly, 1 to identify the margins of uncertainty, 1 to establish the timeline. Hardcastle answered all 3 with the precision of someone who had been waiting to be asked them. The understanding was correct. The margins of uncertainty were, at the outer limit, generous enough to allow for hope, but not generous enough to allow for inaction. The timeline was measured in years, not decades. After the meeting, Webb sat alone in his office for 40 minutes and did not make any calls or read any documents. He simply sat and thought, which was something he did rarely because he had found over the course of his career that thinking without acting was usually a form of delay, and delay was usually a form of fear. But this was different. This required the 40 minutes. He gave them to it. At the end of the 40 minutes, he had arrived at a conclusion that he would spend the next 7 years defending and the rest of his life reconsidering. That the information could not be made public without causing a panic that would kill more people than the field reversal itself, and that the correct response was therefore prepare quietly and completely for the worst case, while simultaneously pursuing every avenue of mitigation that science and engineering could offer. It was a reasonable conclusion. He had reached it through legitimate reasoning. He had not reached it through malice or self-interest or the desire for power, though all those things would accumulate around the decision later. The way sediment accumulates around an object dropped in still water. He had reached it through a genuine belief that he knew better than the people he was deciding for. That was the thing he would have the most difficulty accounting for later, not the decision itself, but the certainty with which he had made it. The complete absence of doubt. The first year was the year of science. Webb assembled a team, Hardcastle as lead, Chen as a geophysical anchor, For others whose names appeared in classified program files and who would not appear in any public record for foreseeable future, and tasked them with two things: confirm the data beyond any reasonable doubt and determine whether anything could be done to slow or reverse the process. The confirmation took 4 months. It was, in Chen's phrase, depressingly thorough. Every methodology they applied, every independent data set they cross-referenced, every alternative hypothesis they tested produced the same result. The field was degrading. The degradation was accelerating. The historical record offered no precedent for intervention. The intervention question took longer. Webb had authorized contact with 3 national laboratories, 2 private aerospace companies, and a research group at MIT whose work on electromagnetic field manipulation had seemed, in the abstract, potentially relevant. None of it was relevant. The field operated at scales and depths that made human intervention not merely difficult, but categorically impossible with any technology that existed or could be developed in the available time frame. By the end of the first year, Webb knew 2 things with certainty. The reversal was coming, and nothing could stop it. He told the president in February 2019, in a briefing that lasted 19 minutes, and that the president listened to with the focused stillness of someone who has learned, over a career in politics, not to show what they are feeling until they had decided what they want to feel. Afterward, the president said, "What do you need?" Webb told him. The funding appeared in the Defense Appropriations Bill 6 weeks later, buried in a line item whose description was sufficiently technical to be unreadable to anyone who was not looking for it specifically. $240 million in the first year, more in subsequent years. Enough to build what needed to be built. Webb chose a Nevada site himself, driving out on a Saturday in March with Chun and a structural engineer named Farouk who had built underground facilities on 4 continents and who, when he saw the depression, the terrain, and the granite shelf below it, said simply, "Yes, this works." They broke ground in April. The second year was the year of lists. The question of who would be in Arcadia was, in Webb's private assessment, the question he had been least prepared for. He had thought of it in the abstract. Of course there would be a selection process. Of course it would need criteria. Of course the criteria would need to be defensible, but the abstract dissolved very quickly when it became concrete. The first list, proposed by a subcommittee that Hardcastle chaired, was organized around scientific and technical expertise. Physicists, engineers, physicians, agronomists, specialists in water management and atmospheric science and structural geology. People whose skills would be directly useful in the construction and operation of a long-term underground facility. Webb had approved this list without major objection. It was rational. It was defensible. The second list was where it became harder. The government liaisons had their own criteria. Essential personnel, they called them, which meant a category that expanded with remarkable speed to include the families of essential personnel, the professional networks of essential personnel, the people who had contributed to programs that essential personnel considered important. Webb pushed back. He pushed back harder than he'd pushed back on almost anything in his career, and he won some of it and lost more than he won. And the list that emerged was a list that Ethan Cross would later examine and find skewed toward the powerful and connected in ways that Webb had known and had not been able to fully prevent. He had told himself that the imperfection was acceptable, that a flawed list was better than no list, that the alternative, scrapping the selection process, opening Arcadia to everyone, which was physically impossible given the facility's design capacity, was not a real alternative. Hardcastle had said, at the end of 2020, at a dinner that the two of them had alone after a particularly long day of committee work, "Marcus, we are deciding who deserves to live." Webb had said, "We are deciding who we have capacity to protect." Hardcastle had looked at him for a long moment. They had not resolved it that night. They would not resolve it before Hardcastle died. The years between 2020 and 2023 were the years of maintenance, of the secret, of the program, of the Webb's own belief that what he was doing was right. He was good at maintenance. He had built a career on it. But maintenance was easier when you were not watching the thing you were maintaining become something you no longer entirely recognized. Arcadia grew. The facility expanded level by level, deeper and more sophisticated, until it was capable of housing 4,000 people for an extended period with a level of comfort and safety that Webb found, on his quarterly inspection visits, genuinely impressive. The engineering was extraordinary. The life support systems were elegant. The agricultural section, by 2022, was producing a meaningful percentage of the facility's food requirements under artificial light, a feat that the agronomist team had achieved 6 months ahead of schedule. It was a remarkable thing. Webb recognized that it was remarkable, and he also recognized on those inspection visits something else, that the people who would live here had not been asked, that the 4,000 names on the list were living their ordinary lives without any knowledge of what had been built for them and what had been decided about them and what was coming. He had made his peace with this. He made his peace with it again each time it surfaced. He was practiced at the making of peace with things. Chin told him in 2023 that he was making a mistake. She used those words, specifically in his office, sitting across from him with a directness she had never moderated in the years he had known her. He told her that the decision had been made and was not reversible. She said, "Every decision is reversible until it isn't. You're choosing to treat this one as if it already isn't." He did not have a good answer for that. He gave her the answer he had, which was about stability and panic and the limits of what people could bear, and she listened to it and said, "I've heard that argument for 6 years, and it has never gotten better." She left his office. She came back the next morning and continued her work, because she was the kind of person who did not let disagreement become abdication, and because she understood that the work mattered regardless of whether the decision around it was right. Webb respected her for it. He was not certain he deserved her respect in return. Hardcastle came to him in January 2026 and said he was not sleeping. This was not a medical complaint. It was a confession. Webb understood the difference. They sat in Webb's office for 2 hours, and for the first time in 9 years of working together, they did not talk about the program or the data or the logistics of what needed to happen next. They talked about what it had cost, what it was costing, the specific weight of knowing something that the people around you did not know, and carrying that weight every day, and watching people around you live their lives in ignorance of the thing that was coming. Hardcastle said, "I have a daughter. She's a good scientist. She works for NOAA on ocean currents, and she's good at it, and I am proud of her, and I have spent 9 years lying to her about what I know." Webb said nothing. Hardcastle said, "I am 82 years old, Marcus. I don't have very much time left regardless, and I find that I cannot spend what I have left knowing what I know and saying nothing." Webb looked at him. He saw a man who had spent his professional life in the service of precision and truth, and who had spent the last 9 years in the service of concealment, and who had arrived at the end of it, at the place where the two things could no longer coexist. He did not try to talk him out of it. He did not authorize it. He said, "Edward, if you do this, I cannot protect you." Hardcastle said, "I know. I'm not asking you to." They shook hands. It was the last time Webb saw him alive. 3 weeks later, Hardcastle was dead of a heart attack, the folder in his daughter's hands. The chain of events already in motion that Webb would spend the following weeks trying to manage, and would ultimately, in the small hours of night in March, decide to stop managing. Not because he had become a different person, because he had finally, after 9 years, run out of arguments for being the person he was. Chapter 7. Dario. The man who answered on the second ring had the voice of someone who spent most of his time outdoors and had gradually lost the habit of indoor conversation. Not unfriendly, the opposite, just unpolished. The way things get when they're used for their actual purpose rather than for appearances. Cross. A pause, the brief recalibration of someone hearing an unexpected name. "It's been a while." 3 years, said Ethan. "I need a favor." "What kind?" "The kind where I don't explain everything on the phone, and you say yes anyway." A longer pause. Then, with the particular equanimity of a man who has lived alone at 3,000 meters for 6 years and has stopped being surprised by much. "How many of you?" "2. "Come then." That was Dario Vendi, 53 years old, former atmospheric physicist at the University of Bologna, currently the sole operator of a private meteorological station in the Sierra Nevada at an elevation that discouraged casual visitors. He had worked with Ethan at NASA for 8 months in 2019. During the last real collaboration Ethan had been permitted to conduct before the SHIELD project ended everything. They had not been close. Exactly. Dario was not the kind of person who did close, particularly, and neither was Ethan, but they had been the kind of colleagues who understood each other's work without needing it explained, and in the specific culture of geophysical research that was its own form of intimacy. They drove through the night, leaving the desert behind and climbing into mountains as the temperature dropped and the stars became dense and close overhead. Maya slept for 2 hours somewhere in the middle of the drive, her head against the window, her breathing slow and even. Ethan drove and did not sleep and did not mind. He had always thought better in motion. He thought about the number 23, or 28, or 34. He thought about what happened to civilization when the infrastructure that held it together, the satellites, the power grids, the communications networks, the intricate interlocking systems that moved food and water and medicine from where they existed to where they were needed, stopped working, not slowly with time to adapt. Quickly, the way systems failed when the thing they were built on disappeared. He had run the models, not the government's models. He did not have those, but his own, built over the last 18 months with the same careful attention to what the data actually said rather than what it was comfortable to hear. The models were not uniform in their predictions. In some scenarios, regional infrastructure survived long enough for improvised adaptation. In others, the cascade was faster and more total. In all of them, the first 72 hours were the hinge point. What happened in the first 72 hours after the field crossed the critical threshold would determine more than anything else what the world looked like a year later. Whether the structures of governance and supply and community that humans had built held together or flew apart. Whether the response was coordination or chaos. And that Ethan had come to understand with the slow inevitability of a calculation resolving was the most important argument for telling people now. Not in 72 hours. Not when it was already happening. Now, while there was still time to prepare, to contact family, to move to low radiation zones, to stockpile water, to do the 1,000 practical things that the difference between knowing and not knowing made possible. The government's argument, the argument he could infer from Arcadia, from the classified program, from every choice they had made, was that telling people would cause panic, and that panic would kill more people than the field reversal itself. It was not an unreasonable argument. Ethan had spent time trying to find a flaw in it. The way you spent time trying to find a flaw in an elegant proof that produced a result you didn't like. The flaw was this. The argument assumed that panic was the only possible response to the truth. It assumed that people, given accurate information about a threat, would respond with chaos rather than with the complicated, imperfect, genuinely human mixture of fear and cooperation and practical action that was the actual historical record of how communities face disaster. It was, he thought, a very specific kind of contempt, not malicious, almost affectionate, in the way of people who believed they were protecting the ones they looked down on, but contempt nonetheless. Maya shifted in her seat, beside him. He glanced at her, still asleep, a small frown between her brows as if she were solving something even unconscious, and returned his eyes to the road. The mountains rose around them, dark and enormous, and the stars above were so numerous and close that they seemed like something you could reach. Dario's station was a low building of wood and metal anchored to a granite shelf at the edge of a ridge that overlooked 3 valleys, and, on clear days, a vast sweep of the central valley far below. Inside it was warm and cluttered with the specific clutter of someone who used everything they owned and owned nothing they did not use. Instruments cables, whether data printouts organized in ways that looked chaotic and were not, a kitchen that smelled of coffee and something with garlic, bookshelves that covered 2 full walls. Dario himself looked the way the station looked. Wore in the right places functional, with a kind of compressed density that comes from years of working alone in places where precision is not optional. He was shorter than Ethan remembered, or perhaps the mountains had recalibrated the scale of things. He shook Ethan's hand with the grip of someone who forgot sometimes to modulate, and nodded at Maya with the slightly formal courtesy of a man who had been raised to be polite and had not entirely lost a habit despite the solitude. "Eat first," he said. It was not a question. They ate. Pasta with what turned out to be a sauce of improbable complexity for something produced at altitude from what appeared to be pantry staples, and bread that Dario had made himself that morning and that Maya said was the best thing she had eaten in a week, which was not a high bar given the week they'd had, but was clearly sincere. Dario said little during the meal. He had the quality of someone comfortable in silence, not awkward in it, not filling it, and he seemed to understand that his guests were eating with the particular intensity of people who had been running on adrenaline and bad food and needed something real before they could talk. When the plates were cleared, he poured coffee and sat back and looked at Ethan. "Now," he said. Ethan told him. Not everything. There was not time for everything, but the essential architecture, the field, the acceleration, the government program, Arcadia, the document, the plan to go public. Dario listened without interrupting. His expression did not change very much as Ethan spoke, which at another time in another context might have been unnerving, but here felt like the right response. The response of someone processing rather than reacting, integrating the information rather than performing a feeling about it. When Ethan finished, Dario was quiet for a moment. "The atmospheric data I've been seeing," he said finally, "the anomalies in the ionosphere over the last 6 months. I thought it was instrument error. I recalibrated 3 times. It wasn't instrument error. No." Dario looked at his coffee. "No, it wasn't." A silence that had a different quality than the silences before it. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Time and a place to work," said Ethan. "Satellite connection. And if anyone asks, you haven't seen us." Dario nodded once, with the decisiveness of someone who had made up his mind before the question was finished. "The satellite dish is on the south side of the roof. Best signal between 6 and 10 in the morning and after 8 at night. The guest room is small." He stood, took his cup to the kitchen. "And I have more pasta, if you need it later." He went to bed without further ceremony, closing the door of his room behind him with the quiet click of someone who understood that the most useful thing he could offer was to stay out of the way. Ethan and Maya looked at each other across the table. "He didn't ask whether it was true," said Maya. "He's a scientist. He checked his own data, and it didn't add up. Now it adds up. That's enough for him." Maya nodded. She opened the laptop. "Then let's use the signal while we have it." They worked through the night and into the following morning with a focused, almost meditative efficiency of people doing something they understood completely and believed in entirely. The division of labor had organized itself without discussion. Ethan structured the scientific data, the sensor readings, the methodology, the comparison between his 18 months of private collection and the government projections from Hardcastle's document. Maya wrote, not the technical material, that was Ethan's, but the frame around it, the human architecture that made the technical material legible to the people who needed to receive it. She was very good at this. Ethan had known she was good at it. He had read her published work, the paper she had written for NOAA on ocean current behavior, that managed to be scientifically rigorous and genuinely readable, a combination that was rarer than it should have been. But watching her do it in real time was different. She built the argument the way you build something structural. Foundation first, then the weight-bearing elements, then the surfaces that people would actually touch. No words wasted. Nothing decorative that wasn't also functional. Around 3 a.m, she stopped typing and looked at what she had written and said, quietly and mostly to herself, "I keep thinking about the people who are going to read this and not believe it." "Some of them won't," said Ethan, without looking up from his screen. "More than some. The first wave is going to be dismissal. Government denial plus social media plus the playbook that Price mentioned. Whoever Price is, and a significant portion of the public is going to decide it's fabricated before they even look at the data." "Yes. So why are we doing it?" Ethan stopped typing. He considered the question with the same attention. He would give a calculation that was not resolving cleanly. Because the people who don't dismiss it, he said, will start looking at the sky, and the sky is going to confirm it. He turned to look at her. We're not trying to convince everyone immediately. We're trying to start a process that the auroras finish. The data opens a door. The light coming through people's windows at 3 a.m. makes them walk through it. Maya was quiet for a moment. That's either very smart or very optimistic, she said. Probably both. He turned back to his screen. Most of the good ideas are. Chapter 8. What the Sky Remembers. The first major aurora came on the night of March 20th. It arrived the way the most significant things arrive. Without announcement, without ceremony, as a simple fact that was suddenly present where it had not been before. One moment the sky above southern Europe was dark and ordinary. The next it was not. The photographs went online within minutes. Rome first. Someone on the roof of an apartment building near the Colosseum, who had gone up to smoke and come back down with footage that would be seen, in the following 48 hours, by 112 million people. The Colosseum itself in the foreground, ancient and massive and lit from underneath by the ordinary tourist lighting, and above a sky that was doing something that skies over Rome did not do, rippling in long horizontal bands of pale green and violet, moving with a slow fluidity that looked less like weather and more like something breathing. Then Barcelona. Then Marseille. Then, and this was the one that made people stop scrolling, because it was so wrong by every expectation, Marrakesh. The northern lights over the Medina of Marrakesh, with the minaret silhouetted against a sky that had no business being that color at that latitude, turning the ancient city into something from a story that nobody had written yet. And then, crossing the Atlantic with the rotation of the earth, Texas, the hill country north of Austin, where a family of had been camping for spring break, and where the eldest daughter, 17 years old and studying for her AP physics exam, looked up from her textbook at midnight and saw the sky doing something that her textbook had not mentioned was possible at this latitude, and filmed it for 4 minutes on her phone without saying a word, just holding the camera very still, because she understood instinctively that this was something you did not interrupt with commentary. Her video was the one that lasted, the one that people kept returning to in the days that followed, when they were trying to understand what they were seeing and why. There was something in the quality of her stillness, the unperforming silence of someone genuinely astonished rather than performing astonishment for an audience, that made the footage feel true in a way that the more dramatic recordings did not. By morning, 300 million people had seen at least one version of at least one recording. The explanations proliferated with the same speed as the recordings. Solar storm, said the meteorologist, which was partially accurate and entirely incomplete. Unusual atmospheric conditions, said the news anchors, reading from notes that their producers had received from sources they did not identify. Spectacular but not unprecedented, said a professor of atmospheric physics in an interview that was picked up by 17 networks, and in which he used the word normal for times in 3 minutes with a particular emphasis of someone who has been told to use it. It was not normal. Ethan watched the coverage on a small screen in Dario's kitchen, his coffee going cold beside him, and felt something that was not satisfaction. Satisfaction would have required the situation to be something other than what it was, but was something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps. The world was looking at the evidence. It did not yet know what it was evidence of, but it was looking. It's beautiful, said Dario, from the doorway. He had come in quietly, as was his habit, and was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed and his eyes on the screen. Even knowing what it means, it's still beautiful. Yes, said Ethan. I've been watching the field from here for 6 years. Dario came in, poured coffee, sat. The anomalies of my atmospheric data go back further than your sensor network, back to 2016. I didn't put the picture together the way you did, but I had the pieces. Why didn't you publish? Dario looked at him with something that was not quite amusement, but was in the vicinity of it. Publish where? I'm not affiliated with any institution. My data comes from a private station that nobody in the establishment takes seriously because nobody funded it. A pause. I sent a paper to 3 journals in 2021. 2 rejected it without review. The third came back with a note that my methodology was sound, but that the conclusions exceeded what the data supported. He drank his coffee. The conclusions did not exceed what the data supported. I know. Yes, you would know. Dario set down his cup. I came here to get away from institutions, from the politics of what can be said and what cannot be said, and who is allowed to say it. I thought the mountains were far enough from all of that. A small pause. It turns out the mountains are not far enough from anything. The atmosphere is the same atmosphere up here. The field is the same field. Ethan nodded. Will you let us use your atmospheric data in the package? He asked. A third independent source. Different instruments, different location, different methodology. It strengthens the case considerably. Dario was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Use it all. Maya came in from the guest room at 7, showered and with the contained, focused energy of someone who had made decisions in the night and was now ready to act on them. She had a list. Ethan had learned that Maya always had a list, and that the lists were always right in the things that mattered and occasionally wrong in the details, and that she corrected the details without drama when they turned out to be wrong. I've drafted the cover letters for all 16 recipients, she said, sitting down with a laptop and a coffee that she did not wait to be offered. The journalists I've chosen have 3 things in common. They've all published on scientific topics with political implications. They all have institutional backing sufficient to protect them from immediate legal pressure. And they've all demonstrated at least once that they'll run something true even when they've been told not to. She looked at Ethan. How much longer do you need on the data package? 4 hours. Maybe 5. Then we send tonight, before the government explanation for last night's auroras gets fully established in the public mind, while people are still asking why. Ethan nodded. That was the right window. He had been calculating it without articulating it, and she had articulated it precisely. Dario's atmospheric data changes the package, he said. We need to integrate it. Can you give me 6 hours? 6 hours, she agreed. Dario, who had been listening from his position at the counter with the expression of someone watching a process he respected, quietly got up and brought more coffee to the table without being asked. Then he went to his workstation and pulled up 6 years of atmospheric records and began the process of organizing them into a format that would be legible to people who had not spent 6 years living with them. Nobody assigned him the task. He simply did it because it was a thing that needed doing, and he was the person who could do it. That, Ethan thought, was how things actually worked, not by design, by people understanding what was needed and moving toward it. At 2 in the afternoon, Webb's message arrived. It came through a channel that Ethan had not known existed, which meant that someone had done something technically impressive. Used his own sensor network as a relay, he realized after a moment of puzzlement, bounced a signal through the instruments he had built and maintained and positioned across 300 kilometers of desert and mountain. The elegance of it was irritating and impressive in equal measure. The message was short. I know where you are. I'm not coming. What you're doing is right. But you need to know something before you send. Call this number. Once. A number with a Washington area code. Webb. Ethan showed it to Maya, without comment. She read it twice. It's a trap, she said. Maybe. Or he's genuine. Also, maybe. What does your instinct say? Ethan thought about the message, about the fact that Webb had used a sensor network, had understood it well enough to use it, which meant had studied it in detail, which meant had spent time on Ethan's work, about the phrase, what you're doing is right, which was either a calculated manipulation or the statement of someone who had changed his mind about something large and was not yet certain how to act on it. My instinct says he's a man who's been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is starting to put it down, said Ethan. My instinct could be wrong. We call from a number he can't trace back here, said Maya. We give him 3 minutes. If anything about the conversation feels wrong, We hang up and send the package immediately, without whatever it is he wants us to know. Agreed. They drove 20 minutes down the mountain to a gas station with a payphone. Ethan had noted on the way up because he was the kind of person who noted payphones, and Ethan dialed the number while Maya stood at the corner of the building where she could see both roads. It rang once. Cross. Webb's voice was what Ethan had expected from a message. Controlled, direct, and underneath the control something that had the texture of exhaustion and something else he could not immediately name. "You have 3 minutes," said Ethan. "Then I'll use them." A brief pause. "The package you're building, the field data, the Hardcastle document, the atmospheric records you've acquired in the last 48 hours. It's solid. It will hold up to verification. I'm not calling to stop you." "Then why are you calling?" "Because there's something you don't have. Something that changes the story from here is what is happening to here is what is happening, and here is what we can still do about it." Another pause, shorter. "Arcadia has engineering specifications that were never in Hardcastle's copy. Underground construction schematics, life support system designs, water recycling, food production, radiation shielding configurations, a full technical blueprint for building a facility like Arcadia." Ethan said nothing. He was doing the calculation, and the calculation was resolving into something he had not expected. "You want us to include the blueprints," he said. "I want the world to know that what we built can be built again. Smaller, faster, with different priorities. Not 4,000 people selected by a committee. Communities, towns, regions with the resources and the time and the knowledge to build something that keeps more people alive." A pause that had a different quality than the ones before it. "We should have done this from the beginning. Built it at scale and told people why. I understood that too late. Why are you telling me now?" The answer came with the slowness of something that had been a long time arriving. "Because Hardcastle died knowing he had told the truth too late. I don't want to make the same mistake twice." Ethan looked at Maya across the gas station forecourt. She could not hear the conversation, but she was watching his face, reading whatever was on it with the same precision she applied to everything. He turned back to the phone. "Send the blueprints to the same channel you used to reach me. We'll verify them before we include them. They'll be there in an hour." "Webb." "Yes. When this goes out, when the world knows, the committee is going to know you helped us." A pause. "Yes," said Webb. "I know. Is that a problem?" Another pause, longer. "It's the right kind of problem," said Webb. And then he hung up. Ethan stood with the receiver in his hand for a moment, listening to the dial tone that replaced the general's voice, and thought about all the ways a person could spend 30 years doing something they believed in and still arrive at a place where the most important thing they had left to do was the opposite of what they had spent 30 years doing. He thought about it with something that was not forgiveness and was not the absence of judgment, but was perhaps something more useful than either: understanding, the plain, unromantic recognition of how it happened to people who were not monsters and not heroes, and not very different from anyone else except in the particular position they had occupied and the particular weight that position had placed on them. He hung up the receiver. Maya was at his shoulder. "Well, we need to go back up the mountain. We have blueprints coming and about 5 hours of work left." Maya looked at him for a moment. "He's helping us." "Yes." "Why?" Ethan started toward the truck. "Because he's trying to be the person he thought he was," he said. "It's harder than it sounds." They drove back up the mountain. Behind them, in the valley below, the ordinary world was going about its ordinary business. 300 million people watching videos of sky that was doing something strange and beautiful and not yet understood. Above them, the mountain rose against an afternoon sky that was entirely normal, entirely blue, entirely itself. For now, for a little while longer. Inside Dario Station, on a table covered in cables and printouts and 2 empty coffee cups, a laptop screen showed a map of the geomagnetic field. The red zone had grown again since the morning update. Small, measurable, inevitable. But beside the map, in the folder Maya had been building for 4 days, was something the map did not show: 172 pages of evidence, and the technical specifications for what comes after, and the careful, precise language of 2 people who had decided that the world deserved to know what was happening to it. The blueprint arrived at 3:47 p.m., exactly as Webb had said they would. Ethan opened them, verified them, cross-referenced 3 structural elements against publicly available engineering literature to confirm they were real and not constructed. They were real. He passed them to Maya. She read through them in 22 minutes. Then she looked up. "This changes the story," she said. "Yes. This makes it not just a warning. It makes a plan." "Yes." She turned back to her screen and began to write the final section of the package, the part that came after the data and the documents and the evidence, the part that answered the question that every person who read it would be asking from the first page. "What do we do now?" She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. Ethan sat across from her and worked and did not interrupt her, and brought her coffee once and set it down without comment and went back to his own work. Dario moved quietly around the periphery of the room, making small adjustments to his instruments, checking readings, existing in a particular way of someone who understands that the best thing he can offer in this moment is his presence and his silence. At 6:12 p.m., Maya looked up from her screen. "I'm done," she said. Ethan stopped typing. He looked at her. "Is it good?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "It's true," she said, "and it's as clear as I know how to make it. And it gives people something to do besides be afraid. Then it's good." Dario came and stood in the doorway. "The signal is good tonight," he said. "Best window starts in 40 minutes. Ethan looked at Maya. Maya looked at Ethan. Outside, the sun was going down behind a ridge to the west, painting the sky in the ordinary colors of an ordinary sunset: orange, pink, the deep blue of altitude, colors that had nothing extraordinary about them, and everything right about them. The colors of a planet that had been doing this for 4 billion years and would, in some form, continue. 40 minutes, said Ethan. 40 minutes, agreed Maya. She picked up her phone. Dial a number she had not dialed in 3 weeks. Listen to it ring. Her mother answered on the second ring, the way mothers answer when they've been waiting without admitting to themselves that they have been waiting. Maya, just a name. All the rest of it in the way the name was said. Mama. Maya's voice shifted, became something slightly different than it was in English, something that had been shaped by a different country and a different set of rooms and the specific gravity of the person on the other end of the line. Te quiero, Decker Algo. She walked outside to say it. Ethan did not follow. He sat in Dario's kitchen with his coffee and his screens and the data that had been a companion for 18 months, and he picked up his own phone, and he called Portland. His sister answered on the first ring. Ethan, surprised. Then, are you okay? Yes. He thought about it, more or less. Lauren, I need to tell you some things. Some of them are going to sound unbelievable. I need you to stay on the line until I finish. A brief silence from Portland. Okay, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He told her. Outside through the window, the last of the sunset was fading and the first stars were appearing, and somewhere behind the eastern ridge the sky was beginning very faintly to do the thing it had been doing more and more, the thing that scientists were calling unusual atmospheric conditions, and that was in fact the oldest light show in the history of the planet. The field speaking in the only language it had left. In 38 minutes, the signal window would open. In 38 minutes, everything would change. But first, a brother told his sister the truth, and a daughter told her mother she loved her, and a man who had spent 6 years alone on a mountain made a third cup of coffee and quietly set 2 of them on the table for when they came back inside. Small things, ordinary things, the most important things there were. Chapter 9. Send. The signal window opened at 8:41 p.m., exactly as Dario had predicted. Maya had the package queued. 194 pages, including the Arcadia blueprints. compressed into an encrypted archive that would decompress automatically on the recipient end with a password she had communicated separately through a different channel to each of the 16 journalists. The cover letter explained what they were receiving and why. It explained the verification steps they should take and the order in which to take them. It told them that they had 72 hours before the story would go out regardless, with or without them, because the window of time in which the information could do the most good was closing, and that window mattered more than the byline. It was the most important email she had ever written, and it looked, in the send window, exactly like every other email she had ever written. A subject line, a body, an attachment, a list of recipients. The ordinary container of an extraordinary thing. "Ready?" said Ethan. Maya looked at the screen for a moment, not hesitating. The decision had been made days ago, had perhaps been made the moment she read Hardcastle's document for the first time in her car in a NOAA parking lot at 6 in the morning, while the sprinklers were running on the lawn outside. She was looking the way you look at something before it changes, because afterward you will not be able to see it the way it is now. "Ready," she said. She pressed send. The progress bar crossed the screen in 4 seconds. Then sent. 16 recipients. 1 package. One night, Dario, who had been standing in the doorway with his arms folded and his expression unreadable, unfolded his arms and went to the kitchen and came back with a bottle of grappa that was older than the station and 3 glasses that did not match. "My father gave me this bottle in 2003, he said, pouring without asking. He said to open it for something that deserved it. He handed a glass to Maya, a glass to Ethan, and kept one for himself. "I think this is something that deserves it," he said. They drank. The grappa was extraordinary, warm and complex, and tasting of something that had been waiting a long time to be itself. Nobody said anything for a moment. Outside, the night was clear and cold, and the stars were very bright, and in the northern part of the sky, faint but present, the aurora moved like a slow conversation between the earth and the sun. "What happens now?" said Dario. "Now we wait," said Ethan. 72 hours for the journalists to verify. Then it goes out. Then everything changes. And between now and then, said Maya, we stay here, stay off the grid, and try to sleep. Dario nodded slowly, as if this were a reasonable plan, which it was, and also the only plan available, which it also was. "The guest room has 2 beds, he said, with a complete absence of implication of a man who had lived alone for 6 years and had long since stopped managing other people's situations. "The smaller one folds out from the wall." He took his grappa and went to bed. Ethan and Maya sat for a while after Dario left, at the table with the mismatched glasses and the old bottle and the laptop screen that now showed nothing more urgent than a sent folder with 16 items in it. The adrenaline that had been running the operation for 5 days was subsiding. Not gone. It would not be gone until this was over. And this was not over, but quieter, like an engine dropped to idle. Underneath, it was something else. Not peace, exactly. Something adjacent to peace. The particular quality of having done the thing you were going to do, and now waiting to see what it did. "Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this," said Maya. Ethan looked at her. "What kind of thing?" "Anything. Something real. Something from before." He thought about it. "When I was at NASA," he said, "we had a tradition in the geomagnetism lab on the last Friday of every month. Someone brought food from wherever they were from. We had 18 nationalities in a lab of 22 people." He looked at his glass. "The Fridays were the best part of the job. Better than the data, which I would not have said at the time, but know now." Maya smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile, without any of the calculation that usually accompanied her expressions. Just a smile, unguarded, brief. "What did you bring?" she asked. "My sister's chili. She made it every time, and I drove it down frozen, and heated it up in the lab microwave, which was probably not what it deserved." A pause. "People requested it. Specifically, over the injera and the pierogi and the banh mi. Lauren's chili. Lauren sounds remarkable. She is. She's a kindergarten teacher in Portland. She says it's the hardest and most important job in the world, and she says it without irony. Another pause. She's probably right. Maya turned her glass in her hands. My mother makes tamales every December, she said. The whole family comes. Cousins, aunts, people I only see once a year. We spend 2 days making them. The men are not allowed to help because apparently we make them wrong. A small pause. My uncle tried once. In 2019, the look my grandmother gave him is the look I model my own disapproval on. Ethan laughed. A real one, short and genuine. Maya looked at him with something that was not quite surprise, but was in the direction of it. You should do that more, she said. Laugh. Yes, I'm told. By Lauren. Mostly by Lauren, yes. The aurora outside had intensified while they sat talking, and the light coming through the window of the station had shifted almost imperceptibly towards something greenish and strange and beautiful. Neither of them mentioned it. They both saw it. Sometimes the right response to beauty is to let it be present without making it a subject. Ethan, yes, I'm glad it was you. She said it simply, without qualification, looking at the table rather than at him, that it was your data and your system, and your name in Hardcastle's file. I'm glad it led to you. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad Sonia called you, he said, and not someone else. Maya nodded. She picked up her glass, finished the last of the grappa, set it down. The fold-out bed is probably terrible, she said. Almost certainly. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Maya. She went inside. He remained at the table for a few minutes more, with the old bottle and the mismatched glasses and the aurora doing its slow work outside the window, and he thought about the 18 months of data that led here, and about his sister in Portland who had listened without interrupting for 40 minutes, and then said, very quietly, I know you're telling me the truth because you're the worst liar I know. And then, what do? And he had told her. Practical things. Things that could be done. Things that made the difference between knowing and knowing what to do with what you knew. She had written them down. He had heard the pen on paper. That sound. A pen on paper. His sister writing down what he told her in the practical, no-nonsense way. She did everything. Had been the most grounding thing he had heard in 5 days. He turned off the light and went to bed. Outside, the aurora ran its colors across the sky for no audience in particular. Beautiful and indifferent and entirely real. Chapter 10. 72 Hours. The first response came from the Guardian at 6:17 a.m. the following morning. It was from a science editor named Patricia Osei, who had been at the paper for 11 years and who had, in that time, developed a particular combination of skepticism and openness that distinguished journalists who were good at covering science from journalists who merely wrote about it. Her message was 4 sentences long. I have read the package 3 times. I have cross-referenced the censored data against our own meteorological archives for the past 18 months and found 11 points of corroboration. I have sent the Hardcastle document to 2 independent experts in geomagnetic science for authentication. I need to speak with you and Dr. Reyes before we proceed. Call me. Maya read it standing up, still in the clothes she had slept in, coffee in hand, the morning light coming through the east window of the station in long, clean bars across the floor. She's real, said Maya. Osei, I've read her work. She's the right person to have read it first. What did the other 15 say? Maya scrolled. 3 more responses. Lil Mong wants a call. Dizite has forwarded to their science desk and expects a response within the day. One of the smaller outlets, the investigative team in Brazil, has already begun independent verification and says their data scientist confirms the sensor methodology is sound. And the other 11? Nothing yet. It's early. Ethan was at his own screen, watching something else. The government's public response to the previous night's Aurora event, which had grown significantly more intense after they had gone to sleep and had been photographed by an estimated 40 million people across 3 continents. The official line had shifted overnight. It was no longer simply unusual atmospheric conditions. Now it was an interaction between a coronal mass ejection and the ionosphere, which was technically a category of true statement, and also the specific kind of true statement that left out everything important. They're managing the narrative, he said. Of course they are. Maya was already composing a reply to Osei. They have a playbook. Price said so. She looked up. We have 71 hours before our deadline. The question is whether the story is established enough by then that the playbook doesn't work. How do we make sure it is? We talk to Osei. We talk to Le Monde. We give them everything they need to verify independently and quickly. And then she paused, something crossing her face that Ethan could not immediately read. We make a video. What kind of video? The kind where two scientists with verifiable credentials sit in front of a camera and explain clearly, in plain language, what is happening and what the data shows and what people can do. She met his eyes. Not a press release, not a document. A face. Two faces. People trust faces in a way they don't trust documents, and the government's playbook is built for documents. Ethan thought about it. It identifies us, he said. Yes. If they haven't found us by the time it goes out, they'll find us immediately after. Maya's voice was level, but at that point it won't matter. If the story is out, if it's verified, if 16 major international outlets are running it, what do they do with us? Arrest us? That becomes the story. Try to discredit us? The data discredits the discrediting. She was right. He ran the logic, and she was right. Dario has a camera, he said. Dario has a camera, she confirmed. They called Osei at 9 a.m. on a voice line, scrambled through the satellite connection. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. Osei asked 41 questions, which Maya counted automatically and without meaning to, and every question was the right question, the kind that demonstrated she had not only read the package but had understood it at the level of its structure, had identified the load-bearing elements, and was systematically testing each one. At the end of the 47 minutes, she said, I'm running this. Front page, online edition, midnight GMT tonight. Print tomorrow. My editor is aware and supportive. We're going with a full package. Then one more thing. The blueprints. The Arcadia construction specifications. My editor wants to know if we can verify the source. Maya looked at Ethan. Ethan thought for a moment about Webb, about the phone call at the gas station, about the particular exhaustion in the general's voice when it said, I don't want to make the same mistake twice. The source is a senior member of the program, he said. He provided them voluntarily. We've cross-referenced 3 structural elements against public engineering literature and confirmed they're real. We can give you the cross-references. That's enough, said Osei. Midnight GMT. She hung up. By noon, 12 of the 16 outlets had confirmed they were running the story. 2 were still verifying. 2 had not responded. The story was going out regardless, at midnight GMT, as Osei had said, but the weight of 12 simultaneous international outlets was something different from 2 people and a satellite modem on a mountain. It was something that could not be made to disappear. Dario's camera was a professional-grade instrument that he used to document weather events, the kind of equipment that people who are serious about what they record use without needing to be asked why they have it. He set it up in the main room of the station, against the wall with the bookshelves, which Maya chose for the background because books communicated something she wanted communicated, that the people in the frame had spent their lives reading and thinking and building the kind of knowledge that made what they were about to say credible. They sat side by side. Maya had changed into a clean shirt. Ethan had done what he could with his hair, which was not much. Dario checked the light, adjusted something, checked again. Ready when you are, he said, and stepped behind the camera. Maya looked at the lens. Then she looked at Ethan. He nodded. She looked back at the lens. My name is Dr. Maya Reyes. I am a research oceanographer with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I have a doctorate in geophysical fluid dynamics from MIT, and I have published 43 peer-reviewed papers in the last 11 years. A breath. I am recording this because you have a right to know what I know, and what I know is this. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not use notes. She had written and revised a statement in her head over the preceding 3 days, without knowing she was doing it, the way the mind prepares for things it knows are coming. She spoke in the plain, precise language of someone who has spent a career translating complexity into clarity and knows that clarity is not the same as simplicity, that you can be clear about something complicated without pretending it is simple. When she finished, Ethan spoke for 6 minutes. He covered the data, his sense of network, the methodology, the alignment with the Hardcastle projections. He covered what the field reversal meant in practical terms. And then he covered briefly but completely what was possible to do, the practical steps, the Arcadia blueprint made open and available, the regions and configurations that offer the most protection, the things that communities could begin immediately, not a counsel of despair. A brief, clear, honest account of a situation that was serious, and the actions that could be taken within it. When he finished, Maya said, "The full data package, the government documents, and the construction blueprints are available at the link below. They have been sent to 16 major international news organizations for independent verification. We are providing our names and credentials because we believe you deserve to know who is telling you this and why. We have nothing to sell you. We have nothing to gain from this except what everyone gains when the truth is available. The ability to make informed decisions. That is all we are offering. The decisions are yours." Dario stopped the recording. The three of them were quiet for a moment. "Good," said Dario. He was not a man who used the word carelessly. "That was good." Maya stood. She felt the way she felt after submitting a major paper. Not relief exactly, but the cessation of particular tension that accompanied something unfinished. The thing was finished now. The rest was not in her hands. "We upload it with the package," she said. "Osei gets it first. Then it goes to a public server simultaneously with the midnight release." "Agreed." She picked up the camera, checked the file. 17 minutes and 42 seconds. Clear audio, steady image. 2 people looking directly at whoever would eventually be watching. She thought about that person. The one who would watch this in the middle of the night, maybe, on a phone in bed, with the aurora visible through their window and a government statement on another tab telling them it was a coronal mass ejection. She thought about what they would need from 17 minutes and 42 seconds of 2 strangers on a mountain. The truth, given straight, without performance. She thought they had managed it. She thought Hardcastle would have thought so too. Chapter 11. Midnight. The story went live at midnight GMT on March 24th, simultaneously across 12 platforms in 9 languages. The Guardian ran it above the fold on the homepage with a headline that Patricia Osei had written herself and revised 4 times before settling on the version that was, in her judgment, the most accurate and the least sensational, which turned out to be the most frightening thing she had ever published. Earth's magnetic shield in critical collapse. Classified documents and independent data confirm government concealment of global threat. Below the headline, the full package. Below the package, the video. 17 minutes and 42 seconds of 2 scientists on a mountain, talking to the camera the way people talk when they are not performing. The first 2 hours were quiet. Not because nothing was happening. The story was spreading at the speed that things spread when they are true and verifiable and have 16 simultaneous sources. But because the people who read it in those first 2 hours were mostly the kind of people who read things carefully before they reacted to them, who cross-referenced and checked and sat with it before they said anything. Journalists, scientists, people who've been watching the auroras and asking questions that the official explanations had not answered. These people did not immediately go online and say things. They read. They verified. They called people they trusted. By 2 a.m., the verification cascade had begun. A geophysicist at the University of Edinburgh posted a 12-tweet thread confirming that the censored data in the package was consistent with what she had been observing in her own research and had been unable to publish because 3 journals had declined to review it. A retired NASA engineer in Houston posted a longer statement saying he recognized the classification structure of the Hardcastle document and that it was consistent with program-level materials he had handled in his career. A data scientist in Nairobi ran an independent analysis of the publicly available geomagnetic monitoring data and posted her methodology and results, which confirmed the field degradation rate to within 3% of Cross's figures. None of these people were coordinating. They were simply doing what scientists do when they encountered data, checking it against what they knew, and saying what they found. By 4 a.m., the story had been seen by 40 million people. By 6 a.m., 300 million. The government response came at 5:47 a.m. Eastern from the White House press office, and it was a response that Price had described. Disinformation, foreign interference, decontextualized classified material. It used the word irresponsible 4 times. It did not address the censored data, because the censored data was not classified material and could not be dismissed on those grounds, and addressing it directly would have required either refuting it, which was not possible because it was correct, or confirming it, which was not possible for reasons that the statement did not need to articulate. The statement was, in the judgment of most of the people who read it, not adequate to the moment. By 7 a.m., for senators had called for emergency briefings. By 8, the German government, which had been aware of the situation through G7 channels and had been waiting, it emerged later for exactly this moment to speak, issued a statement confirming the phenomenon and announcing the immediate release of their own monitoring data. France followed within the hour. Then Japan. The dam, once it began to break, broke the way dams break. Not slowly and then all at once, but simply all at once, because the pressure had been building for long enough that when the first crack appeared, the rest followed immediately. On the mountain, Ethan and Maya watched it on Dario's small screen with Dario's coffee and Dario's particular quality of presence, which was the quality of someone who did not need to narrate what he was witnessing to feel it. The thing that surprised Ethan, though perhaps it should not have, was the images from the cities. He had modeled the panic. He had thought seriously about what widespread public knowledge of a geomagnetic reversal would produce in the immediate hours after disclosure, and his models had included scenarios of significant civil disruption, runs on stores, gridlocked roads, overwhelmed emergency services. These things happened in some places. He was not going to pretend they did not. What the cameras mostly showed, the images that circulated most widely, that people sent to each other, that the news channels kept returning to, was something else. Piazzas in Italian cities where people had come out at 3 a.m. not to panic, but to be together, sitting on steps in fountains and the hoods of parked cars, looking up. A park in Sao Paulo at dawn, hundreds of people who had apparently decided simultaneously that this was a moment for being outside rather than inside, talking in small groups, children on their fathers' shoulders looking at a sky that was doing something remarkable. A street in Seoul where someone had set up speakers and was playing music, and people were listening, and a few were dancing with the green light of the aurora overhead. Because dancing was a thing that humans did when they did not know what else to do and needed their bodies to remember that they were alive. It was not the absence of fear. Fear was present. It was visible in the faces, in the tight quality of the embraces, in the way people held their phones as if they needed something to hold. But the fear was being held, and the holding was being done communally, and that was different from what the models had predicted in ways that mattered. Hardcastle was right, said Maya quietly, watching a feed from a plaza in Naples where several hundred people had gathered in the pre-dawn dark, and where someone was going around with a thermos of something hot, giving it to strangers. Yes, said Ethan. People can handle the truth. Some of it, so far. He was not trying to qualify her optimism so much as to keep them both honest. It's been 8 hours. The hard part is what comes after the initial shock. What happens in the weeks, the months. I know. She did not look away from the screen. But the initial shock is a hinge. If people meet it with each other instead of against each other, if the first instinct is community rather than competition, the weeks and months have a different starting point. Ethan watched the person with the thermos work their way around the plaza. Stranger after stranger accepting a cup of something hot from someone they had never met, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the end of the world as they had known it. Yes, he said, they do. Webb's second message came at 9 a.m. through the same sensor relay channel as the first. It was longer this time. The committee is dissolving. Mills and Torres have separated themselves from the program. Hartley is managing the transition. Arcadia is being transferred to a joint international authority. The German and Japanese governments have both offered participation. The blueprints are being released in full to the unscientific committee within 24 hours. There will be hearings. I will testify. I want you to know that what happened with Hardcastle was not what you may have inferred. He died of a heart attack. There was no order. I am telling you this not because it changes what we did, but because it is true, and you deserve the accurate account. I am sorry for the 7 years. I have been trying to understand for some time whether that apology means anything, and I have not been able to decide. Perhaps IT doesn't. Perhaps what matters more is what comes next. Come to Arcadia when you're ready. There is a lot of work to do, and you are the right people for some of it. Webb. Ethan read it twice. Then he passed the phone to Maya. She read it once carefully and handed it back. Hardcastle really did just die, she said. That's what he says. Do you believe him? Ethan thought about it with the same honesty he tried to apply to data, not looking for the answer he wanted, but for the answer that fit the evidence. Yes, he said. Hardcastle was 82 with a documented heart condition and had been carrying this for 7 years. The timing is terrible, but terrible timing is not evidence of anything except that the world is indifferent to narrative convenience. Maya was quiet for a moment. It matters, she said. Not for the story. The story is out. It doesn't change the story. But it matters for... She paused, finding the word for what this was. For what kind of thing this was. I know. It mattered because a government that had concealed a catastrophic truth was not the same thing as a government that had also murdered the person who tried to reveal it. Both were serious. Only one was something else entirely. The distinction was not academic. What do we do about Webb's offer? She asked. I think we go, said Ethan. Not because I trust him completely, but because Arcadia is going to need people who understand what it's for and are willing to argue about what it should become. And I would rather be in that room than outside it. Agreed. Maya looked at him. But not today. No, not today. Today we stay here. We watch. We answer the calls that need answering. She stood, stretched, looked out the window at the morning light on the mountain. And we let Dario feed us, because he is clearly going regardless, and it would be rude to refuse. As if on cue, Dario appeared in the doorway of the kitchen with the expression of someone who has been cooking for an hour and does not need to be asked about it. Frittata, he said. 10 minutes. He disappeared back into the kitchen. Ethan looked at Maya. Maya looked at Ethan. Something passed between them. Not a word. Not a gesture. Something that did not need either. And then they both turned back to the screen where the world was doing what the world does when it is given a chance. Finding its way, imperfectly and collectively, and with great noise and occasional grace, toward whatever came next. Outside, the morning was clear. The aurora was gone with the daylight. But its absence did not feel like loss. It felt like the space after music stops, when the room is still full of what was just played. The field was what it was. The days ahead were what they would be. The work. The long, unglamorous, necessary work of preparing and adapting and deciding together what mattered enough to save had not yet begun in earnest. But the truth was out, and the morning was here, and in 10 minutes there would be frittata. For now, that was enough. Chapter 12. The World at 3 a.m. In Tampere, Finland, a woman named Kirsi Mäkinen woke at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of her daughter calling from the next room. Not crying. Calling, with the particular urgency of a child who has seen something that requires immediate adult confirmation. Kirsi went to the window. The sky above Tampere was doing something that skies above Tampere did not typically do in late March, which was to say it was a vivid, saturated, impossible green, moving in slow waves that had the quality of something alive and deliberate. Her daughter, who was 7 years old and whose name was Aino and who had the scientific curiosity of both her parents in concentrated form, was standing on the bed looking out the window with her nose pressed to the glass. "Mom," said Aino, "is that the Northern Lights?" "Yes," said Kersey. "But we're inside the city?" "Yes." "We're not supposed to see them inside the city." "No," said Kersey. "We're not." She had read the Guardian article that morning, the one that had appeared in her feed with the kind of headline that made you stop scrolling. She had read it twice, carefully, in the way of a structural engineer who had been trained to assess load-bearing claims before accepting them. Then she had cross-referenced 3 of the data points against sources she trusted. Then she had called her husband, who was on a research trip in Oulu, and told him to come home. He had not asked why. He had heard her voice. They had a plan of a kind. Finland had civil defense infrastructure that most countries did not have. And Kersey knew where the nearest shelter was and what it contained because this was the kind of thing she had made it her business to know since Aino was born, not from paranoia, but from a conviction that knowing things in advance was always better than not knowing them. The shelter was 4 blocks away. It had water and food stores and a radiation-shielded interior that had been maintained and inspected annually since 1970. She would take Aino there in the morning, with a bag she had spent the afternoon packing, and they would wait for Mikko, and then they would decide together what came next. Tonight, though, was tonight. "Can I stay up and watch it?" said Aino. Kersey looked at her daughter's face in the green light. 7 years old, nose pressed to glass, watching the sky do something extraordinary. "Yes," she said. "Get your blanket." They sat together at the window, the blanket around both of them, and watched the Northern Lights move above the city that had not been supposed to see them. And Kersey told Aino everything she knew, in the plain and honest language that she used for everything she told her daughter, because she had decided when Aino was very small that children deserved the same quality of truth that adults did, only with more patience. Aino listened. She asked good questions. When she ran out of questions, she leaned against her mother's shoulder and watched the sky in silence. And after a while, she said, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Kersey thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think so," she said. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we are. And there are a lot of people doing the same thing." "How many?" "Billions," said Kersey. "The whole world." Aino considered this. "That's a lot of people working on it," she said. "Yes," said Kersey. "It is." In Austin, Texas, a man named Robert Delgado was sitting on the roof of his hardware store at 3 a.m, which was where he went when he needed to think, and he was watching the sky and not thinking as much as he was feeling, which happened to him less than he would have preferred, and which he therefore paid attention to when it did. Robert was 58 years old and had run the hardware store for 31 years, since his father had handed it to him the way that fathers hand things to sons and families, where the handing is assumed rather than negotiated. He did not resent this. He had come to love the store, the same way he had come to love most things in his life. Slowly, through proximity and accumulated time, until the love was so woven into the ordinary fabric of his days that he could not have separated it out if he had tried. He had spent the day after the story broke doing what he did when something large happened. He opened the store and he listened. People came in for things they suddenly needed: flashlights, batteries, water containers, the kind of practical inventory a household that people compile when they've been reminded abruptly that households require maintaining. He helped them find what they needed, and he answered the questions he could answer, and for the ones he couldn't, he said so. And by the end of the day, he had had 200 conversations, and he had learned something from each of them. What he had learned was this: people were frightened, and they were also, almost without exception, doing something about the fear. Nobody had come in to panic at him. They had come in to buy flashlights. The distinction mattered. He had closed the store at 8 and called his sister in San Antonio and his 2 adult children, one in Dallas and one in Portland, and told them he loved them and told them what he thought they should do, practically, in the coming weeks. His son had already started. His daughter was making a plan. His sister said she had been making a list since morning. He had felt, after those calls, a particular kind of tired that was not unpleasant. The tired of someone who has done what could be done for today. Now he sat on the roof and watched the sky that was doing things he had never seen a sky do, and he thought about his father, who had built the store from a single room and alone in 30 years of 7-day weeks, and about his customers, who had been coming in for 31 years with the ordinary needs of people who were building and fixing and maintaining their lives, and about the fact that all of this, the store and the city, and the ordinary human infrastructure of getting through the days was what was worth protecting. Not in the abstract. Specifically, this roof, these streets, these people who came in for flashlights. He did not know what the next year would look like. Nobody did. But he knew what he was going to do tomorrow morning. Open the store at 7, like always, and help whoever came and find what they needed. It was not nothing. In fact, he thought, on a night like this, sitting under a sky like this, it was quite a lot. In Rome, Dr. Francesca Arditi was still in her hospital at 3 a.m. because she had not gone home, because going home required passing through the emergency department, and the emergency department had not had a quiet moment since the story broke 18 hours earlier, and she had found, as she always found in busy periods, that leaving was harder than staying. The emergency department was not handling field reversal casualties. There were none yet. The physical effects on the surface were still days away from being significant at Italian latitudes. What it was handling was a human response to the knowledge of what was coming. The anxiety attacks, the panic responses, the elderly patients whose families had called ambulances because they had said something frightening and the families did not know what else to do. The people who had been managing chronic conditions and had stopped because a chronic condition had seemed more manageable than the thing they had just read about. The people would come in simply because a hospital felt like the right place to be when the world was uncertain. Francesca had triaged and treated and talked to people and referred and triaged again, and somewhere around midnight she had sat down in the break room for 10 minutes, and a nurse named Giulio had brought her a coffee and said, "Dottoressa, have you seen the sky?" She had gone to the window. The Colosseum was visible from this angle, lit from below by its ordinary amber lighting, and above it the sky was doing the thing that the whole world was now watching in one form or another. She stood at the window for 2 minutes. Then she went back to work. What she thought, standing at the window, was not philosophical. It was practical. That the hospital needed a plan for the coming weeks. That the plan needed to address radiation exposure protocols and supply chain disruption and the psychological load on staff who were, like everyone else, trying to do their jobs while also processing something enormous, and that the plan needed to exist before it was needed because plans made in the middle of a crisis were always worse than plans made before one. She drafted the plan on her phone during the next break, in a notes app, in bullet points that she would expand in the morning into a document she would send to the hospital director before 9 a.m. The city outside the window was doing what cities do, lit, moving, making its sounds, and the sky above was extraordinary, and somewhere in the balance between those two things, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, was the work that needed doing. Francesca finished her coffee and went back to the emergency department. The work was waiting. It was always waiting. That was not a complaint. It was simply what she had known when she chose this, and what she still found at 3 a.m. in a busy hospital under an impossible sky, to be true, that the work was waiting and that there were people to do it, and that this was its own form of answer to the question of what the world was and what it was worth. Chapter 13. The Road to Arcadia. They left the mountain on the morning of March 27th, 3 days after the story went out and 2 days after the world had begun, in its halting and imperfect way, to reorganize itself around a truth it had not chosen to receive but was receiving nonetheless. Dario walked them to the truck. He had given them supplies, food, water, a spare satellite communicator, with the same matter-of-fact generosity with which he had given them everything else, as if providing for people in need was simply a thing that one did and did not require acknowledgement. He shook Ethan's hand. He held Maya's for a moment longer. Come back, he said, when this is settled. Come back, and I'll show you what 6 years of atmospheric data looks like when you know what you're looking at. We will, said Maya. She meant it. Ethan could tell she meant it, and he found that he meant it too, which was not something he would predicted 3 days ago. 3 days ago, Dario had been a name in his phone, a favor he was asking. Now he was something else, a person who had opened his house and his data, and his father's grappa, without being asked why, and who had stood in a doorway and watched the world change on a small screen and said, simply, good. That was good. The kind of person you came back to. They drove south and east, out of mountains and back into the desert, and the landscape changed around them with the particular drama of the Sierra Nevada, giving way to the Great Basin. The trees thinning, the elevation dropping, the air drying, the sky opening up until it was enormous and very blue and everywhere. The radio was on. It had been on since they left. And what it carried was different from what it would have carried a week ago. Not the ordinary traffic of news and music and advertisements, but something that had the quality of a frequency that had been scrambled and was now, slowly, resolving into a signal. People calling into talk stations to say what they were doing, the practical and the frightened and the unexpectedly calm. Scientists being interviewed in the flat, careful language of people who were finally being asked to say out loud what they had been saying in journals for years. Government officials, not the ones who had issued the initial denial, different ones who were navigating a situation that changed every hour, talking about response frameworks and international coordination, and the Arcadia blueprints that had now been downloaded 11 million times from the public server. 11 million times in 72 hours. Ethan had checked the number 3 times because it seemed like a number that should require verification. People are building, said Maya. She was looking at her phone, scrolling through something. Look at this. This is a community in rural Montana. They've already identified a site, an old mine system, natural granite, 300 meters down. They're organizing engineering volunteers. How many people? 400 families so far. They've been at it for 36 hours. She scrolled further. And this is a network of villages in the Swiss Alps. They're proposing to convert existing mountain infrastructure, ski resort tunnels, old military shelters from the Cold War, into something that could support their communities for an extended period. The Swiss already have the best mountain shelter infrastructure in the world, said Ethan. They built it during the Cold War. Most of it is maintained. They would. She put the phone down. It's happening, Ethan. Not everywhere, not uniformly. And yes, there are places where it's going badly, but it's happening. He kept his eyes on the road. The desert stretched ahead of them, flat and honest, and indifferent to what was happening to the people crossing it. The hard part, he said, is that the people with the most resources are also the people most likely to build something that only serves the people with resources. I know. Arcadia was that problem at scale. Webb and the committee decided who mattered. Whoever has money and land and engineering capacity is going to make the same decision, just locally, which is why what Arcadia becomes matters, said Maya. If it becomes a model, genuinely open, genuinely structured around what communities need rather than what the most powerful people want, it changes what people think is possible. It sets a standard. That's a lot of weight to put on one underground facility in the Nevada desert. Yes. She looked at him, which is why the right people need to be in that room arguing for what it should be. He glanced at her. You've already decided what you're going to argue for, haven't you? He had. He had been building the argument in the back of his mind since Webb's second message, the same way he built calculations, starting from what the data required and working toward what that meant. The selection criteria have to change completely, he said. Not who is most valuable to some committee's idea of what civilization should look like afterward. Who has the skills and the knowledge that communities will actually need. Doctors, engineers, farmers, teachers, people who know how to build things with their hands, people who know how to grow food in controlled environments. He paused. And the capacity has to expand. 4,000 was a number chosen for what the facility could support at its current build level. The facility can be expanded. The blueprints show where and how. That's what the 11 million downloads mean. People are going to build their own. But Arcadia itself, the one that exists and is funded and has infrastructure, should be the one that shows what the standard looks like when you do it right. Maya was quiet for a moment, and he could tell she was listening in the particular way she listened when she was integrating something rather than waiting for him to finish. Add one thing, she said. What? Children. The selection criteria have to explicitly prioritize families with children, not because adults don't matter, because the point of surviving is what comes after, and what comes after requires people who are young enough to build it. A pause. Webb's list had very few children. I checked. The 4,000 skewed heavily toward working-age professionals. That's a civilization that knows what it remembers but doesn't know how to become something new. Ethan thought about that. You're right, he said. I usually am. She said it without smugness, as a simple statement of statistical fact. It's one of my more useful qualities. He smiled at the road. She saw it. She did not comment on it, which was the right call and which he appreciated. They stopped once, at a gas station in a small desert town called Lovelock, whose main street they drove through slowly because there were people gathered in the park at its center, 100 people, maybe more, in a town whose population sign at the edge had listed as 2,300, doing something that took Ethan a moment to identify. They were listening. Someone was standing on the low wall of the park's fountain and speaking, and the people around them were listening with the focused attention of an audience that had decided the person speaking had something worth hearing. Maya rolled down her window. The voice that came in was a woman's, clear and practical. Water storage first. The Hendersons have the biggest tank in the county, and Jim has already said yes. We start there, and we work outward. The mine on Route 9-inch, I called Bill Ashworth this morning, and he's driving out today to assess the lower levels. If the structure is sound, which he thinks it is, we have a natural starting point. Maya rolled the window back up. They sat in silence for a moment. 2,300 people, said Ethan. Organizing themselves, said Maya, without waiting for anyone to tell them to. He pulled back onto the road. They did not say anything else for a long time. They did not need to. The woman on the fountain wall had said what needed to be said more efficiently than either of them could have managed. The desert received them again, and the road ran straight and true toward the south, and the sky above was a particular deep blue of altitude and aridity that Ethan had always found, for reasons he never fully articulated, more honest than any other sky. It did not promise anything. It simply was. That was enough. Chapter 14. Underground. Arcadia was not what Ethan had imagined. He had imagined something military, something that looked like what it was, a facility built by people who thought primarily in terms of security and control and the management of a very specific problem. Corridors and blast doors and the institutional beige of government, interiors that communicated, above all else, that the people who built this place were not thinking about how it would feel to live in it. What they found, descending the elevator that Webb had arranged to have waiting for them at the surface entrance, a low building of corrugated metal that looked, from the outside, like a maintenance depot for something agricultural, was different, not comfortable, exactly, not designed for comfort as its primary purpose, but not what he had imagined either. The main corridor of level 1 was wide enough for 8 people to walk abreast, and its ceiling was 4 meters high, and along its length at regular intervals there were what appeared to be light panels that produced something close to natural daylight in its afternoon quality, warm, slightly golden, falling at an angle that suggested the sun at about 45 degrees. The effect was stranger than the fluorescent alternative would have been, because it was almost right, which was more unsettling than being entirely wrong. Maya noticed it immediately. The lighting, she said. Circadian regulation, said Ethan. They cycle it. It changes over the course of the day to simulate a normal light environment. It's important for long-term habitation. Without light cycle variation, human sleep patterns destabilize within weeks. You knew about this? I knew about the principle. I didn't know they'd actually implemented it well. Webb met them at the intersection of Level 1 and the corridor that led to Level 3, which was where, he had told them, most of the facility's working life took place. He was in civilian clothes, dark trousers, a plain shirt, no insignia of any kind, and he looked like a man who had slept a few hours in the last 3 days and had decided that this was adequate. He was 60 years old and looked it, and Ethan revised his earlier impression of a man who trained like someone younger. What he saw now was someone who had simply been too busy to stop. Webb offered his hand. Ethan shook it. Maya did too, after a pause that was brief enough to be polite and long enough to be honest. "Thank you for coming," said Webb. "We haven't decided what we're agreeing to yet," said Maya. "I know." Something shifted in Webb's expression. Not offense, something more like recognition. "That's why I wanted you here rather than in a conference call. Come, let me show you what exists and what we're trying to figure out. Then you can decide." He walked. They followed. The tour took 2 hours. Webb conducted it himself, without intermediaries, which Ethan noted because it was a choice. He could have sent a staff member, could have given them documents, could have managed the introduction through any number of layers. Instead, he walked every corridor himself, answered every question directly, and when he did not know an answer, which happened 3 times, he said so and asked someone nearby who did. Level 1. Administration, Communications, the surface monitoring station where a team of 6 watched the geomagnetic field data in real time and updated the facility's projections every 6 hours. The field was at day 21 of the critical window, accelerating. The numbers on the board were not good. Webb showed them without comment, which was the right approach. Level 2, Residential. This was where the 4,000 were, or would be. The facility was currently at about 60% capacity, the remainder of the listed individuals still making their way to Nevada from various points of origin, some of them having decided in the wake of the public disclosure that they were no longer certain they want to come, a fact that Webb mentioned without editorializing. The residential level was where the gap between the facility's ambition and its reality was most visible. The rooms were small, adequate, not generous, and the common areas had the slightly provisional quality of spaces that had been designed for a specific purpose and were being asked to serve a broader one. There were people in them, sitting, talking, moving between rooms of a particular combination of purpose and uncertainty that characterized people who had arrived somewhere significant and were still deciding what that meant. A woman about Maya's age, sitting in a common room with a child perhaps 5 on her lap, looked up as they passed. Her expression was not hostile. It was the expression of someone who had made a very large decision very recently and was in the process of determining whether it had been the right one. Maya slowed. "How old?" she asked the woman, nodding at the child. 5.5, said the woman. Then, after a pause, "She keeps asking when we're going home." Maya looked at the child, who looked back with the direct, unself-conscious gaze of a 5-year-old encountering a stranger and not yet having learned to look away. "What do you tell her?" said Maya. "I tell her soon." The woman's voice was steady. "I don't know if it's true, but I tell her soon." Maya nodded. She did not offer reassurance that she did not have to give. She moved on. Ethan, who had been watching, fell into step beside her. "That's who this is for," said Maya quietly. "That's the whole argument." "Yes," he said. Level 3 was where the work happened, and it was, in Ethan's assessment, genuinely impressive. The agricultural section alone covered half a level, hydroponic systems running under full-spectrum grow lights, with a variety of food crops at different stages of development, managed by a team of 4 agronomists who had the quietly focused quality of people who had been given an important problem and were solving it. The water recycling system was elegant, a closed loop that could process and return a potable quality 94% of all water used in the facility, with a reserve tank sufficient for 8 months at full capacity as a backup. The medical facility was the level's other anchor, 12 beds, a surgery, 2 physicians, and 4 nurses currently on staff, a pharmaceutical stockpile, that had clearly been assembled with the same care as the food system. The lead physician, a small, precise woman named Dr. Kimura, who had the bedside manner of someone who had learned a long time ago that directness was more useful than comfort, walked them through the capacity and limitations without being asked. "We can manage most things," she said. "We cannot manage everything. What we cannot manage is what I worry about at 3 in the morning." She looked at Webb. "We need 2 more physicians. At minimum, a pediatrician specifically. The new selection framework is being drafted now," said Webb. "Medical capacity is at the top of the priority list." Dr. Kimura looked at Ethan and Maya with the evaluating gaze of a diagnostician. "Are you staying?" she asked. "We haven't decided yet," said Maya. "Decide quickly." She said it without drama, as a logistical observation. The window for decisions is getting shorter every day. She returned to her work. Webb led them to a small conference room off the level 3 corridor. A table, 6 chairs, a screen on one wall showing the real-time field data. He closed the door and sat down and looked at them with the directness of a man who had stopped managing his presentation some hours ago and was operating on something more elemental. "Tell me what you need from me," he said, "and tell me what you're willing to give. I'll tell you honestly what I can offer and what I can't. Then we'll see if there's a structure that works." Ethan looked at Maya. Maya looked at Ethan. She spoke first, which was right, because she had been building the argument longer and had built it better. The selection criteria changed completely and immediately. "We want to see the new framework before it goes into effect, and we want veto power over any criteria that reproduce the logic of the original list. Capacity expands to a minimum of 12,000 within 6 months, with a target of 25,000 at full build-out. Families with children are explicitly prioritized. Skills-based election replaces status-based election. The facility's governance structure becomes transparent and multi-stakeholder, not a committee of 6 with no external accountability." She paused. "And the blueprints that went public stay public. No attempt to restrict access, no legal action against communities using them." Webb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The blueprints are already public. That ship has sailed, and I have no interest in pursuing it." He looked at Ethan. "The rest?" "The field monitoring data from the facility gets shared in real time with the international scientific community. No more Omega classification. No more management of what gets known and when. The data is available to everyone, updated continuously, verified by external parties." Ethan held Webb's gaze. "The world has the right to know what the field is doing. Every day, in real time." Webb looked at the screen on the wall. The field data pulsed with its 6-minute update. "Yes," he said. "That's it," said Maya. "What would you like me to say instead?" Webb looked at her. "I spent 7 years deciding what people were allowed to know. I was wrong. Not because the information wasn't dangerous. It is dangerous. It will cause damage. We'll be managing the consequences of this disclosure for months. But because the alternative was worse, and because people had the right that you said they had, and because..." He stopped, and when he continued, his voice had a different quality, something that was not quite private, but was no longer entirely the general either, because Hardcastle tried to tell me that 2 years ago, and I told him he was being sentimental. He was not being sentimental. He was being right. The room was quiet. Outside in the corridor, they could hear the sounds of facility, footsteps, voices, the low mechanical hum of systems keeping people alive underground. "Then we stay," said Maya. "For now, provisionally. We'll draft a new selection framework together, starting tomorrow, and we want the governance structure proposal on the table by the end of the week." "Done. And Webb." She looked at him steadily. "If at any point the decisions being made in this facility stop being ones I can defend, I will leave, and I will say publicly why. That's not a threat. It's an operating condition." Webb looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not offense, not discomfort. Something that was closer, Ethan thought, to relief. "Good," said Webb. That's exactly the kind of operating condition this place needs. Chapter 15. The Last Meridian. The field crossed the critical threshold on April 9th, 17 days after the story went out, and 3 days ahead of the median projection. It did not happen with the dramatic immediacy that the word threshold implied. It was a number on a screen in the Level 1 monitoring station, updated at 6:47 a.m. by the satellite feed, and the scientist on duty, a quiet Peruvian woman named Castellano, who had been at her station for 11 hours and who had been watching the number approach its limit with the focused attention of someone waiting for an important result, looked at it for 3 seconds, confirmed it against the backup feed, and then pressed a button that sent an alert to every screen in the facility. Ethan was in Level 3 when the alert came. He looked at his screen, looked at the number, did the verification calculation in his head out of habit, and confirmed what the screen said. Then he walked to where Maya was working. She was in the agricultural section, where she had been spending time with the agronomist learning things she had decided she needed to know, and said, "It's happened." She looked up from the hydroponic tray she had been examining. She looked at him for a moment, and he saw her do what she always did: process the information, integrate it, determine what it required. How long until the surface effects are significant? 72 hours for the first wave. Satellite disruption will come first. Some of that is already happening. Power grid impacts will fall within a week in the most exposed latitudes. The rate after that depends on how the field fragments, whether it's a clean reversal or a chaotic one. Castellano's projection? Chaotic. The field is breaking into multiple poles rather than flipping cleanly. That's harder to model and harder to shelter from in the short term, but it means the reversal itself may be faster than the historical average. How much faster? We don't know. We've never watched one happen. She stood. She peeled off the thin gloves she'd been wearing for the hydroponic work and set them down with the neatness that characterized everything she did. "Then we do what we came here to do," she said. The next 72 hours were the fullest Ethan had ever lived, which was a strange thing to think about a period that included no sleep and very little food and a quantity of difficult conversations that would have been, in any other context, exhausting. But there was something about the density of it. The way each hour required everything you had and gave it back transformed into something useful that made exhaustion feel like the wrong word. Exhaustion implied depletion. This felt like expenditure toward something. The first satellite disruptions came at hour 14. The internet did not go down. The infrastructure was more distributed and resilient than the worst-case models had assumed, but it became intermittent, patchy, unreliable in ways that were more psychologically destabilizing than a clean outage would have been. People refreshing pages that sometimes loaded and sometimes didn't. Calls that connected and then dropped. The ordinary texture of connected life becoming something that flickered. The power grid disruptions began on the second day, concentrated in the highest latitudes first, Scandinavia, Canada, the northern reaches of Russia, and the response in those regions was faster and more organized than the models had predicted, because those were places with experience of infrastructure stress and communities that had, in the preceding 17 days, done the most rapid preparation of anywhere in the world. Finland, which had maintained a network of civil defense shelters continuously since the Second World War, and which had spent the 17 days since the disclosure expanding and restocking them, lost grid power on day 2 and had its population substantially sheltered within 18 hours. The efficiency of it was, in the monitoring data that came through to Arcadia before the satellite links became too unreliable to maintain, remarkable. "They were ready," said Ethan, watching the data. "They believed us," said Maya. "And they had 17 days. 17 days is enough if you use them." Webb came to find them on the evening of day 2. He found them in the Level 1 monitoring station, where they had been for most of the preceding 36 hours, and he brought coffee and sat down without ceremony. "The committee hearings have been postponed," he said. "Obviously. The senators who are going to conduct them have other priorities at the moment." He looked at his coffee. "They'll happen eventually." I'll testify when they do. We know, said Ethan. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you because you should know where things stand. Webb paused. Mills has gone quiet. Torres issued a statement through his lawyer. Hartley. I don't know what Hartley is doing, and I suspect I won't know until it becomes relevant. Chin is here. She's been working with Castellano on the projection models since day one. Chin is good, said Ethan. She's the best geophysicist I've ever worked with. Webb said it without complication, as simple professional assessment. She was also the first person to tell me we were making a mistake. She told me in 2021, and again in 2023, and I didn't listen. He looked at his hands. I've been thinking about why. And, said Maya, because listening would have required changing, and changing felt like losing. He looked up. That's not an explanation. It's just what it was. The three of them sat with that for a moment. Outside the monitoring station, the facility was running at full capacity for the first time. All its systems, all its people, the whole complicated organism of it doing what it had been built to do, which was keep people alive in a world that had become, temporarily but genuinely, hostile to human life at the surface. What does it look like up there? Asked Maya. Webb was quiet for a moment. The aurora is... He stopped, and when he continued, his voice had something in it that was not in his voice as a rule. I went to the surface this morning, through the maintenance exit on the north side, just for a few minutes. The sky, he shook his head slightly, it's every color at once. I don't have a better description than that. Every color at once moving, and the light is so bright you can read by it even though it's 4 a.m. A pause. It's the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen. I stood there for 10 minutes, and I couldn't move. The room was quiet. I'm glad you went, said Maya. So am I. On the night of day 3, when the surface radiation had climbed to levels that made extended exposure dangerous, and the facility's own monitoring systems had registered the first measurable increase in gamma flux, even at depth, Ethan went up. He went alone. He told Maya he was going to check something on level 1, and instead went to the maintenance exit on the north side that Webb had described, put on the radiation suit that hung by the door, and climbed the access ladder to the surface. The night hit him like something physical, not the cold, though it was cold, the desert losing its stored heat rapidly in the altered atmospheric conditions. Not the wind, though there was wind, something that moved across the open ground with quality he had never encountered before, charged somehow, as if the air itself was carrying more than air usually carried. What hit him was the light. Webb had been right. Every color at once. The sky was not performing the aurora as he had seen it in photographs, or even in the recordings that had started the whole chain of events 17 days ago. The sky was the aurora. There was no sky behind it and no darkness between the colors. It was total, immersive, a light show of such completeness that the concept of looking at it felt wrong. You were not looking at it. You were inside it. He stood and did not move for a long time. He thought about his father, who had died looking at rocks, who had spent his life looking at things the earth had made, and had found in them something that satisfied a need Ethan had inherited without understanding it until he was grown and looking at his own data and feeling, for the first time, that the need was being met, the need to understand something large, to find the pattern in the thing that seemed too big to have one. The field had a pattern. It always had. The pattern was simply one that operated on a time scale that made individual human lives feel, from the geology's perspective, brief to the point of not matching. 780,000 years since the last reversal. Whatever came next would last, at minimum, tens of thousands of years. He tried to hold that time scale in his mind the way he had learned to hold large numbers, not by making them small, not by translating them into something more manageable, but by sitting with the actual size of them until the mind adjusted, until you stopped expecting the large thing to be the size of a human thing. The earth was doing what it had always done. The human work was to find a way to be still here when it finished. He heard footsteps behind him and knew, without turning, who they were. Maya came and stood beside him. She had found a radiation suit somewhere. He did not ask where. She stood close enough that her shoulder was almost touching his, looking up at the same sky. "You said you were going to level 1, she said. "I lied." "I know. I followed you." He looked at her. In the extraordinary light, her face was every color in none of them, and she was looking at the sky with the expression she wore when she was completely present in something, not analyzing it, not preparing to write about it or include it in a model or make it useful, simply receiving it. "It's the field," he said. "What we're looking at. The field breaking apart and reconfiguring and—" "Ethan." "Yes, I know what it is." She looked at him. "I don't always need you to explain the science." "Right. Sorry." "Don't be sorry. It's one of your better qualities." She turned back to the sky. "Just not right now." He turned back to the sky, too. They stood together under the impossible light, the last signal before the dark that was also the first signal of whatever came after, and the field did what it was due regardless of what they felt about it, which was vast and impersonal and entirely beautiful. After a while, he did not know how long, the light made time feel approximate. Maya's hand found his in the dark, not dramatically, not as a moment, just as a thing that happened, the way the right things happen, quietly, without announcement, as if they had always been going to. He held on. Above them, the meridians of the field dissolved and reformed and dissolved again, the ancient invisible architecture of the planet rewriting itself in light. And below them, 7 meters down through granite and engineered concrete, and the accumulated decisions of people who had tried and failed and tried again to do the right thing. 12,000 people were keeping themselves alive, more now than when they had arrived. The new selection framework had been approved 4 days ago. The first families under the new criteria had begun arriving 48 hours ago. Children first, as Maya had argued. Families with children, teachers, farmers, builders, doctors, the people whose skills were not the most prestigious but were the most necessary. The facility was at capacity in the old sense and was exceeding in the way that living things exceed their design parameters. Because the need was real and the will was there in the walls, it turned out were more flexible than the blueprints had specified. They were all going to be here for a long time. They were going to argue about things and solve things and fail at things and try again. They were going to make the 1,000 decisions that turned a survival facility into a community, and a community into something that deserved to be called, eventually, a home. It was going to be harder than any of them had planned for, and more possible than the worst projections had allowed. Ethan knew this the way he knew the field. Not because he could predict the details, but because he understood the system well enough to know what it was capable of. Systems were resilient. More resilient than they look from outside. Human ones especially. "We should go back down," said Maya. "The exposure time. 2 more minutes." She did not argue. She stayed. The 2 minutes passed in the light. Then they went back down together through the maintenance hatch and down the ladder and into the warm hung facility, and the hatch closed above them. An extraordinary sky was on the other side of it, doing what it was going to do. And they were here, and there was work to do, and it was, in all the ways that mattered and some that did not, enough. Epilogue. 3 years later. The child's name was Lena, and she was 8 years old, and she had never seen the surface. This was not, in the community that Arcadia had become, an unusual circumstance. Of the 4,000 children currently living in the facility and its 3 expanded annexes, designated East, West, and the one that everyone called a garden because of the hydroponic atrium that had been added in the 2nd year, and that was, by any measure, the most beautiful space underground that any of them had ever seen, approximately 60% had arrived young enough that the surface was more concept than memory. They knew it from photographs and videos and from the careful, consistent curriculum that Maya had helped design in the 1st year, which held the principle that children who would eventually return to the surface needed to understand it, love it, and know what it required of the people who lived on it. Lena was one of Maya's students. She was not the brightest in the group. That was a boy named Felix who had arrived from Stuttgart age for with an already evident gift for mathematics that Ethan found both delightful and mildly intimidating. But she was the most curious, which Maya had come to believe was the more useful quality. Brightness solved the problems in front of you. Curiosity found the problems that hadn't been seen yet. On a Tuesday morning in what they were calling April, the calendar continued, maintained by consensus, because the marking of time turned out to be important to people in ways that went beyond the practical. Lena raised her hand in the middle of a lesson about ocean currents and asked, "Dr. Reyes, when we go back up, what will the sky look like?" Maya looked at her for a moment. "We don't know exactly," she said. "The field is still settling. The projections suggest it will have established a stable new configuration within the next 2 to 5 years. When it does, the sky will look like—" She paused, finding the right words for an 8-year-old who had never seen open sky, like a very large blue room with a ceiling very far up. "And at night, it will have more stars than you've ever seen in any photograph, because the new field configuration will interact with the atmosphere differently, and the light will be—" She stopped. "It will be different, and we don't know yet exactly how, which means you might get to be one of the first people to see it and tell the rest of us what it's like." Lena considered this. "I'll write it down," she said, with the decisiveness of someone who has identified an important task and is committing to it. "So we remember." "Yes," said Maya. "That's exactly right. So we remember." That evening, in the small apartment on level 2 that they had shared since in the first year, Maya told Ethan about Lena and the question and the answer she had given. He listened. He was working on something. He was always working on something. This had not changed, but the something had shifted from the analysis of catastrophe to the analysis of recovery, which was harder in some ways and better in most. But he put it down while she talked, because he had learned, over 3 years of proximity, that Maya Reyes talked about her students the way she talked about nothing else, with the unguarded directness of someone who was fully invested and did not mind that it showed. "She's going to be remarkable," said Maya. "She already is. All of them are." She sat down. "That's the thing I didn't expect. I thought the hard part would be the children. Keeping them stable, keeping them from understanding too much too soon. But they really fine. Better than fine. They've made a world out of what's here, and they live in it completely. They don't spend a lot of time grieving the world they don't have." "They never had it," said Ethan. "You can't grieve what you never had." "That's not entirely true. You can grieve what you were told you would have." She thought about it. "But they don't. They seem to have decided, without anyone telling them to, that what's here is what's real, and what's real is worth living in." A pause. "I think we could learn something from that." Ethan looked at her across the small room. Their small room, the one with her books on one shelf and his instruments on another, and the photograph of Lauren and her family on the wall. Sent to the network relay before the connections had become too unreliable, Lauren standing in front of shelter entrance in Oregon with her husband and 2 children, and the expression of someone who was genuinely okay and wanted him to know it. "I think we have been learning it," he said. Maya looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I think we have." The field continued its long settling. The projections updated every 6 hours, and every 6 hours Castellano checked them, and every 6 hours a number that represented the field's coherence index moved, slowly and not always in the same direction, toward the stable configuration that the geological record said was coming. Not quickly. Nothing about the Earth happened quickly, in human terms. But the direction was there, and the direction was enough. In the garden, under the grow lights that Ethan had helped recalibrate in the second year to better simulate the new spectral qualities of surface light. As the field settled, things grew. Food, mostly. The practical necessities. But also, in the corners and along the walls where the agronomists had allowed it, things that were not practical in any immediate sense. Flowers. A small tree that one of the engineers from Brazil had grown from a seed she had carried in her pocket on the day she arrived, which had no name in the facility's inventory because nobody had gotten around cataloging it, and which produced, twice a year, small white blossoms that lasted 3 days, and that the children of Level 2 considered the most important event on the calendar. On the morning after the blossoms came, there were always children in the garden before breakfast, standing very still, looking at the tree, learning, perhaps, what it meant to find something worth stopping for. The last meridian of the old field had dissolved. The new ones were forming, invisible and patient, in the deep electric currents of the planet's core. Above the desert, the sky was strange and beautiful, and slowly, season by season, becoming something new. Below it, people were living, which had always, in the end, been the point. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Your support means a lot and helps bring more stories to life. Until next video.